Chapter 900. Lu Xiaoyi returned to the shaking shadow land. Nothing had changed, and it was impossible for it to change. This was because he had not been away for more than 3 years. In fact, most of his time was spent traveling through the universe in Taiposhi. The time spent in the real Taipu realm was not long. Che Xie, Songrong, and the others gathered around him. They did not feel like they were reunited after a long separation. They were just friends on a trip. What happened? You don't have to hide it from me. If nothing happened, I'm afraid no one would come to greet you. A few swordsmen laughed. Che Xie said, It's not a big deal. 2 years ago, a few swordsman brothers went to the upper forest valley to gamble on donkeys. It seemed like they were doubtful about the results. In the end, they got into a fight with the organizers. Out of the 4 brothers, 2 died and 1 was injured. Lu Xiaoyi frowned. He had heard of the upper forest valley before. It was not a land. It was a space of clouds that was similar to a valley in the middle of a few smaller continents. Due to its special geographical location, the clouds in the upper forest valley were very thin. Most of the time, the sky was clear and the visibility was high. These few smaller continents were closer to the core of the heavenly cycle upper realms nebula. They were far from the 9 great divine mountains on the surface. Naturally, the power that could penetrate through was limited. There was not much production. The continents were barren, and the people were unruly. They were very wild. Therefore, they were too lazy to invest much power in this place. It formed a famous 9 no-man's land in the upper realm of Zhou. The resources were barren. Of course, they would think of ways to make money. The location and production here were not suitable for business. They could only think of some crooked ideas. Donkey gambling was the specialty of this place. To put it simply, it was like horse racing in his previous life. For cultivators, especially the middle and low-level cultivators, many of their thoughts and habits had not completely broken away from the structure of mortals. Perhaps the disciples of the big sects could not be confused by external matters. However, the majority of the cultivators in the upper realm of Zhou were unorthodox cultivators from the 3,000 smaller continents. How much Tao heart could one expect from small sects and small sects? How much self-discipline did they have? In order to survive, in order to vent, it wasn't strange for some random things to appear here. If Red Hill in Zhou was known for its small commodity wholesalers, then Shanglin Valley in Zhou was known for its gambling industry. Humans were born with a natural inclination to gamble. This was especially true for cultivators. Their inclination to gamble was unparalleled. Every year, a similar donkey gambling event would be held in Upper Forest Valley. In recent months, there were private bets between cultivators, and official bets by the organizers. With the support of thousands of gamblers, it was also a profitable business. In a place like a gambling den, fighting was a common occurrence. It wasn't rare at all. People who lost until their eyes turned red, people who robbed them halfway, and people who were angry at the gambling den resorted to cheating. As long as it was something that could be found in a gambling den in the mortal world, it could be found here. There was no difference. Swordsman was a regular here. Because this was indeed a place to vent one's energy. He might even be able to make a fortune. Of course, it was the same for the other orthodoxies. The ones who gambled even more fiercely were the body cultivators. With these participants, fighting became the norm. However, there weren't many deaths, especially in a few of the more famous orthodoxies. How could they lose 2 precious swordsman seeds there? This made Lu Xiaoyi very curious. What's the reason? Is it our fault? Che Xie was very sure. There are no rules in a donkey gambling den. It's a foul place to begin with. There are all kinds of people there, and we swordsmen have never been the most arrogant there. The body cultivators are the most arrogant. But this time, according to the brothers who came back, the organizers seemed to be deliberately targeting them. If it was in the past, it would just be a verbal dispute. However, under the provocation of the other party, a few brothers couldn't hold back and ended up fighting. You know, fighting in casinos is normal. It would be strange if they didn't fight. However, most of the fights happened between gamblers. There were very few disputes with the organizers. They were doing business, so why would they treat their customers so rudely? Most of the time, they just warned them to leave. I didn't expect it to be so strange this time. The organizers' will to fight was very firm, and from the looks of the cultivators who surrounded us, it was premeditated long ago. We brothers are all experienced fighters, so we can see this trick clearly. But we were caught off guard, and it was very difficult for us to escape. That's why 2 of us died. Lu Xiaoyu did not doubt their testimony. There was no need for them to lie. Swordsman was far from being the most arrogant and despotic among the 3,000 orthodoxies in the upper realm of Zhou. This was because the strength of the swordsman here was limited. There were only 9 branches of the sword vein. In terms of numbers, they were far less than some of the orthodoxies, such as the body vein and the bloodline. Recently, the sword vein had been in the limelight, but it was only because of his leadership in the battle between the heaven and earth chessboard and the monks that made a name for themselves. However, everyone knew very well that although they had made a name for themselves, their losses were too great. Hundreds of swordsmen Jin Dan had died inside. They needed to rest and recuperate, so why would they go out and stir up trouble? You mean someone deliberately set up a trap to target us, Shaking Shadow? Song Rong nodded. Yes, that's what we think. At that time, there were very few swordsmen. After the battle between the heaven and earth chessboard, all the sword vein disciples were restricting their disciples. They rarely came out to wander, because they were worried about the revenge of the Buddhists. Our brothers have been holding it in for so many years. We also thought that Upper Forest Valley was far from the mainland and close to the boundary core, so the Buddhists wouldn't be able to reach so far. In the end, we didn't expect. Lu Xiaoyu was very satisfied. At least they did not act rashly when he was not around. In the Taipu realm, Big Eye and Small Eye made a move. In Upper Forest Valley, they made use of the organizers to make a move. They were thinking that he would not be able to return. That was basically the case. Boss! A few of them looked at him, meaning that he should respond. Lu Xiaoyu waved his hand. Go, go, go. Go and practice your swordsmanship. Wait for me to rest for a while and think clearly about the details of this matter. The few of them left reluctantly. What their boss said made sense. They had to find out the truth and who was the mastermind behind this, right? Even though everyone could guess who it was. Also, for the next few days, Shaking Shadow only allows people to enter but not leave. Don't go out and rest for a while. Lu Xiaoyu did not even think about finding out the truth. How would he find out? Who would he send? For a dispute like this, the other party had 1,000 reasons waiting for you, making you unable to say anything. It was a matter of 2 hands clapping in the first place. It was just that in terms of propriety, it was more intense. Was it strange for 1 or 2 people to die in a place like this? Did the Buddhists have anything to do with the gambling house? This was not strange. In this cultivation world, people only saw a very small part of it, the tip of the iceberg. The long history of the upper sect determined that their hands could reach anywhere. Chapter 901. Upper Forest Valley is a place where crooks and honest folk mix together. The gambling donkeys themselves are not controlled by a single family but a joint venture between several families. Take a look. In the Sword Shadow Palace, Taoist Master Mao took out a 3-dimensional map and pointed. There are 7 small continents, Guishi, Huya, Linquan, Chaotu, Dahuang, Shaohuang, and Shuangwe. They form a 3-dimensional concave shape. In the middle of this concave shape is the so-called Upper Forest Valley. They're all small lands with poor resources, and they don't have a unified power. They're constantly scheming against each other. If there's something that can unite them, it's the gambling donkeys of Upper Forest Valley. They can share the benefits equally. That's about it. Are there any Yuanying spiritual masters? Lu Xiaoyu asked. Taoist Master Mao glared. Yes, but not many. Their strength is also very average. The so-called famous people are basically limited to their corners. Kid, you're not thinking of attacking those 7 small continents, are you? Let me tell you, let's not talk about whether or not you can take them down. In the Zhou upper realm, attacking a continent needs to be approved by the upper realm. Otherwise, you can only slowly grind it down with the belief of the orthodoxy. This is the rule. Otherwise, how can the Shaoying realm survive under the pressure of the bitter Zen temple? If you take it without permission, the Yuanying spiritual masters have the right to attack you on the premise that they are protecting their own continent. Furthermore, if you break the rule, others might break your rule too. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Why would I? My head is not clamped. Why would I do such a stupid thing? I'm just asking and asking around. Taoist Master Mao heaved a sigh of relief. These Jin Dan swordsmen were not very obedient to him, and could not be restrained. He was also afraid that these people would go out, and cause trouble and bring trouble back to the Shaoying realm. We all know who's behind this, but it's impossible to get evidence for this kind of thing. So the best way is to restrain your subordinates and not go out to cause trouble. Wait for time to pass. How many years have passed since the 500-year buffer period? I reckon that after 100 or 10 years, it will naturally not be as tight as it is now. With the addition of new blood, the sword vein will also return to its original order. That would be a mature move. I've already told you, look at those sword vein disciples. After the heaven and earth chessboard game, they all obediently stayed at home and didn't come out. Yet you let our most difficult shadow-shaking sword vein disciples out for a stroll. Now that trouble has come, we can't even find the real culprit. Lu Xiaoyi spread out his hands. Old Mao, these people are not serious sect disciples. They are used to being wild. How can I restrain them? After chatting with Taoist Mao for a while, Lu Xiaoyi returned to his own palace and continued to work hard. He also ignored the swordsman's probing. He knew very well that this kind of suppression wouldn't last long. After a few more times, the hearts of the people would scatter. On this day, after finishing his sword practice, he thought of his small seal world again. He wondered how it was doing now. The Taipu meteorite core was destroyed by him. It was his own doing. When he entered the small world again, his first feeling was that there might be some changes in it. Countless rocks were still piling up and collapsing, but compared to before, there was some kind of change. The cycle time seemed to have slowed down. Furthermore, there seemed to be a trace of regularity. The most important thing was that he found traces of pure jade's spiritual vigor on both rocks. Was this because of the influence of the Taipu meteorite core? Although it had been smashed into ashes, the chaotic will it contained had not disappeared. Instead, it had merged with the countless rocks and was exerting a subtle influence. The unexpected hatred had turned into an unexpected joy. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Xiaoyi took out a jade bottle from his storage ring. In his opinion, what was missing from the Taipu meteorite core's change in the small world? Those strands of pure jade spirit essence were there, but the Taipu ancient spirit essence that was supposed to accompany it was missing. This was another gamble. The path of cultivation was made up of countless of such gambles. Some were not important, some would decide the future. When you are unaware, the Taipu ancient spirit essence was released from the jade bottle and circled around Lu Xiaoyi 3 times. But as a spiritual being with the lowest level of consciousness, being trapped in the jade bottle was still a restriction to its nature. Freedom was not something that only humans yearned for. The ancient spirit essence rushed into this space. To its small body, this space was already big enough. Although there were countless huge rocks rising and falling, these scenes that humans hated did not affect it at all. When the primal chaos world was just formed, the changes in heaven and earth were much more spectacular and dangerous than now. In essence, these physical manifestations had no meaning to a spiritual being like it. There was no harm. After circling around a few times, it was obviously very satisfied. It did not know how to cry out, but its agile body could represent its mood. How could this kind of environment be compared to the small jade bottle? When it was tired from flying, it aimed for a huge rock that had strands of pure jade spirit essence and flew right into it. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the ancient spirit essence's movements, and no longer worried about his gains and losses. He had his reasons for doing so. Seeing that his cultivation level was slowly rising and he was not far from the late stage of Jean Dan, how to form his nascent soul had long been put on the agenda. What he could do now was to look at the process of cultivators forming their nascent soul, including what he saw in the 5 rings of sky, and also the one in the upper realm of Zhou Xian. Ignorant and blurry, when the time is right, the nascent soul will naturally form in the womb. Maybe there were people who could do this, but Lu Xiaoyi was very alert. His experience in the upper realm made him very clear of his own shortcomings. Therefore, he could only use his own stupid method. Part of it was following his heart, part of it was learning from others. The so-called learning from others did not mean that he had to learn other people's methods. That was impossible. He only wanted to find a trace of common ground in the process of forming his nascent soul. To be honest, he did not find anything. Maybe there was no common ground in this process? Or maybe what was recorded was only on the surface, and no one was willing to tell the real secret. He did not find any common ground, but he found a lot of problems with failing to form his nascent soul. Among them, there was a book written by a senior from Huangting Taoism. In his analysis of the gains and losses of forming his nascent soul, he proposed a hypothesis: the problem of the use of spiritual opportunity from outer space. His point of view was that, because cultivators had already prepared extraterrestrial spiritual vigor for themselves years or even decades or centuries before they formed their nascent souls, would this spiritual vigor, which contained spirituality, weaken in a direction that no one had noticed during the long wait? Lose its effectiveness? Shrink? So much so that it would affect the essence of the cultivator's nascent soul the moment they formed their nascent soul? Or would it directly affect the success of forming their nascent soul? This was a very obscure idea, and there was nothing to prove it. Cultivators forming their nascent soul was not an assembly line job. It was easy to obtain data to prove this speculation. Moreover, even spiritual opportunity that had been stored for a long time was still spiritual opportunity. There had never been a case where it completely lost its effectiveness. Therefore, it was left unsettled. Chapter 902. But Lu Xiaoyi valued this speculation very much. He was very clear that there was a lot of truth in these genius speculations. It was just that they might not be accepted by the cultivation world at the moment. But with the passage of time, there would be a day when these truths would be revealed to the world. As long as it had spirituality, how could it be willing to stay in a small bottle for hundreds of years? Even if its energy did not change, but spirituality meant that it had a personality, right? If it had a personality, it would not tolerate it, right? What it lost might be some kind of mysterious spiritual thing. This was just a guess, and he could not make a conclusion. Bringing out the Taipu meteorite core gave him a chance to test his idea. If he didn't have this thing, he could only keep Gu Ling in the jade bottle until the day he needed it. But now, Gu Ling's mother body had been brought out by him. Why didn't he put the child back into the mother body and let it grow in a place it was familiar with? This was a gamble that he had to take. Compared to losing the Taipu ancient spirit in the small world, he might gain more. Now, it seemed that the situation was not bad. He would not stay here to interfere with the transformation of the small world in the Taipu meteorite core, but he would come in every day to take a look and experience it. Without the control of Taipu, the transformation would be much slower than in the Taipu realm. But this was a good thing for him, because he could experience the transformation and formation of a world more easily. This was a rare opportunity. In the Taipu realm, what he gained was not only the Taipu ancient spirit. This was what he gained when he went into the meteorite group. Opportunity and risk came together. Lu Xiaoyi's days were very carefree, but the swordsman's days were very torturous. Che Xia and a few others came to complain to him more than once, saying that it was difficult to suppress their emotions, but it was to no avail. Their leader seemed to have changed his soul, and he was very happy at home. He did not have the courage of the chessboard of heaven and earth, and did not have the imposing manner of the Red Hill. There were already a few swordsmen who left secretly, probably because they felt that they could not get what they really needed here. Lu Xiaoyu was still indifferent. A few months later, a Cloud Sea flying boat landed in Aoying. Judging from the logo, it belonged to the Qingwei Immortal Sect. Lu Xiaoyu welcomed an important guest in his territory. Looking at the big boat outside, Lu Xiaoyu began to drool. "Senior Brother Snot, aren't you a bit too much? Flying boat to pick them up? Was there a swimming pool up there? Many wives and concubines? Piles of slaves? Qingwei's treatment is really good. Are you still short of people?" Slug laughed. "We're short on people. Our Qingwei will always lack talents like Brother Air." However, this isn't me putting on airs. It's just that I'm sending a group of people to other lands, so I came here to take a detour. Brother, this place of yours is great. The mountains are high, and the Emperor is far away. No one can restrain you from doing anything. Even I want to beg the sect to let me rule this place alone. The two of them joked around for a while before Slug took out a jade slip. The words Xian Yan Chen Xing were particularly eye-catching. Seeing this, Slug took it but didn't say anything. Since they were both interested in becoming friends, they naturally got along well. When the two of them talked about the changes in Taisu, they were both filled with emotion. Lu Xiaoyu asked, "Brother Snot, did you come here in a hurry, or did you want to stay for a while and let me do my part as a host?" Of course, Slug wasn't really passing by. In fact, his real intention was to give him the cultivation method. Sending people was just a cover for a mission he had accepted in passing. He didn't dare to disobey the Supreme's words. Moreover, this one year was also very interesting. He was a person worth befriending. His position in carefree travel was also rising, so he was worth investing in. Thus, he went with the flow. "I think this place of yours is not bad. It has good mountains, good water, and a lot of interesting people. It just so happens that I have nothing to do recently, so I want to find a place to cultivate for a while. You won't find me troublesome, right?" Lu Xiaoyu laughed. "Why would I?" Junior Brother asked this because I've taken a fancy to one of Senior Brother's things. I want to borrow it. Slug felt a bit of pain. This one year was really too friendly. The first time they met, he asked for a cultivation method, and now he wanted to borrow something. Who knew what he had taken a fancy to? Since he had already come this far, he could only pretend to be Dafa. What does Junior Brother want to borrow? Just say it. As long as I have it, I won't refuse. Lu Xiaoyu went straight to the point. Of course I know that Senior Brother has it, so I asked shamelessly. I think Senior Brother's Cloud Sea flying boat is not bad. My brothers have been cooped up in planet Yaoying for decades. Because of the pressure from Buddhism, they rarely go out. So I want to borrow the boat and go for a spin in Zhouxian. Slug suddenly understood. However, he was also more quick-witted than others. I won't lend it. If it's just for a spin, I won't lend it to you unless you tell me what you want to do with the flying boat. Looking at Slug's burning gaze, Lu Shi sighed. Alas, no one in the cultivation world was easy to fool. In Yaoying's sword palace, the swordsmen were in groups of 2 or 3. They were either practicing their swordsmanship. However, no matter what they were doing, they couldn't muster up any enthusiasm. The death of the 2 swordsman brothers made them extremely angry. This was blatant targeting. It was Buddhism using outsiders as a pretext to take revenge on the Sword Vein and the Yaoying Sword Palace. Although there was no evidence, everyone in the cultivation world talked about karma. Without Buddhism behind them, how could the swordsmen around Upper Forest Valley dare to be so arrogant? Originally, they were holding back because they wanted to wait for their leader to come back and make a decision. Everyone would divide the work and find those Upper Forest cultivators who killed them to regain their dignity. However, they didn't expect that their leader would not make any move after he came back. If they had known earlier, why would they wait? Some of them would have already sneaked into the Upper Forest 7 continents. Chase Ye and a group of people were drinking wine. The swordsmen below were unsettled. They tried their best, but they couldn't stop some of them from leaving in disappointment. Although only a few left, they were pulled in later. The only consolation was that all the cultivators who participated in the chessboard of heaven and earth were still there. However, if their leader continued to act this way, they could imagine that more and more people would leave. Nandang sighed. Actually, you shouldn't blame our leader. If he was alone, he would definitely punish the murderer, no matter who he is. However, there are too many things involved in this. Buddhism, Taoism, swordsmen, the rules, and the sword vein's current situation. If you were our leader, what would you do? Fei Sha disagreed. Based on what you said, we'll stay low for 500 years. Then why did the big guy kill so many of his brothers in the chessboard of heaven and earth? If we can stay low for 500 years, then we can stay low for 5,000 years. We'll stay low until our backs bend, our swords blunt, and our hearts become numb. Did we practice our swordsmanship just for this day? Everyone was silent. They understood the logic, but reality and ideals, survival and pursuit, were always a pair of contradictions. It was hard to get the best of both worlds. If the big guy went forward recklessly and threw everyone's lives into the chessboard of heaven and earth, would that be a real swordsman? It didn't seem so. If that was the case, the sword vein would have gone extinct a long time ago. Chapter 903. Songrong sighed. Over the past few decades, their hot-bloodedness and passion had been stripped away bit by time. This was the core motivation for them to gather here. If it was just to endure, then why couldn't they endure it? Why did they have to come here? In the upper realm of Zhou Xian, there were not only swordsmen like them. There were 3,000 unorthodox sects and 3,000 little Lus. It would not be a problem to pick out a few hundred sword cultivators. However, most of them had chosen to hide, which was why they were nowhere to be found. That was not their path. This group of people could be said to be the most courageous among the rogue swordsmen cultivators in the upper realm of Zhou Xian. That was why they gathered together, because of their leader, hoping to open up a new world, even if they were to die and sink into oblivion forever. It was because of this realization that they went to the heaven and earth chessboard and met their leader. That was why they gathered under the shaking shadow banner. They were the most rebellious swordsmen in the upper realm of Zhou Xian. They did not join the sects because they could not stand the cowardly behavior of the sword vein sections. The heaven and earth chessboard finally rose to prominence, but it was all brawn and no brains. It could not even be considered brawn. The so-called elite assault team was useless in front of the monks. If it was not for their leader, the sword vein behind the heaven and earth chessboard would be scattered like sand. Their backbone would be bent, and they would never be able to stand out among the orthodoxies in Zhou Xian. But now, even the leader's spine had been bent. As their leader's most loyal followers, they did not want to see such an outcome. However, they did not know how to awaken their leader's ambition. Everyone was drinking to drown their sorrows. Only one person was eating heartily without a care in the world. His mouth was full of oil, but he did not seem to be depressed at all. Zhou Fan! Are you a pig? You only know how to eat. They had been together for decades and were very familiar with each other, so they did not hide their emotions when they spoke. Zhou Fan continued to chew. I think you're the pigs. You're all worrying over nothing. Of course, you have to eat and drink. Only after eating and drinking will you have the strength to kill. There are only two possibilities for our leader to remain calm. One is that he has really withered, and the other is that he is holding back a big move. With the boss's strength and character, how could he possibly wither? Since it was impossible, he must be holding back a big move. Just wait and see. I'm afraid that your swords won't be sharp enough when it's time to kill someone. That would be a real King embarrassment. Chexia stared at him. You're a traitor. Did you hear some rumors? That's why you're so calm and composed right now, right? What was there that could be enjoyed by himself but not shared with his brothers? If you don't say something today, don't blame us for being impolite. I'll let you lie down for 2 months. Zhou Fan had no choice but to admit. Don't do this. What's the point of having a few people fighting one? I really don't know what the boss is thinking, but I know what the boss did in the Tai Pu realm. Everyone's eyes lit up as they stared at him like a pack of wolves. Zhou Fan, on the other hand, was rather mysterious. I only found out about it today, because a Qingwei cultivator I'm familiar with was on the flying boat. He told me about what happened in the Grand Simplicity realm. He pushed his wine cup away. There's no more wine. Who's going to refill it for me? The group of swordsmen cursed. This guy was always like this at crucial moments. They couldn't afford to offend him, so Che Xia poured the wine for him personally. Good brother, I have enough wine for you. Zhou Fan smiled proudly. 5 people from our Zhou Xian went up to the Tai Pu realm. Other than the boss, do you know who else is there? Song Rong said. Big and small eyes, snot bug, rabbit crack lip, morning clothes. Who doesn't know about Zhou Xian and Jin Dan? You're just a traitor. You're only telling us half the story. You're sneakily drinking our wine. Zhou Fan raised his neck and finished the wine in one gulp. 5 went and only 4 came back. You guys can think about it. Feisha's eyes widened. Big and small eyes didn't come back? Nandang was very excited. Boss did it? Zhou Fan pouted. Aren't you all very smart? So what's there to worry about? I've always been worried that I'll be a burden to the boss when the time comes. You guys, on the other hand, are all acting like resentful wives. There were even a few idiots who ran off on their own. The boss despises this kind of disorganized and undisciplined people the most. It's even better that they left. I'm afraid it'll be difficult for them to come back in the future. The group of people raised their glasses in invitation. After drinking, Song Rong was very hopeful. We definitely have to choose a few people to go with the boss. I'm good at running errands, doing odd jobs, assassinating, and tracking. Che Xia is more mature. It's best if he stays at home to look after the house. Everyone agreed, each bragging about their own abilities. Naturally, they excluded Che Xia, which made him very depressed. He hadn't even said anything, so why was he excluded? Bullying an honest person, right? This wine was a little too bitter. Everyone knew that as long as the boss was there wouldn't be too many people going. There would only be a few who would take action, and it wouldn't be enough for them to kill. Since there was a limit to the number of people, they couldn't give up on the issue of qualifications. Who knew they would have to use their strength to decide? Just as the wine table was about to turn into a battlefield, suddenly, the sound of a sword whistling came from the top of the palace. That was the boss's sword whistling. This was the first time they heard it in the dozens of years they had been in the shaking shadow realm. While they were still in shock, Zhou Fan had already disappeared. They hurriedly followed and complained to each other. Look at the disciples of the big sections. Their reactions, their bellies, and their shamelessness. Lu Xiaoyi stood beside the Cloud Sea flying boat of the Qingwei immortal sect, chatting with Snot. The swordsmen beside him boarded the boat one by one. There was a hint of excitement in his nervousness. They were all very fast, afraid that if they were too slow, they wouldn't be allowed to board because there was a limit on the number of people. But what made everyone feel strange was that no matter whether it was the first few people, the first few dozens, or the last 100 or so, when all the 107 swordsmen who stayed in the shaking shadow realm had boarded the flying boat, the boss didn't chase any of them away. This made everyone feel very strange. It didn't seem like they were going to fight, but to go on an outing? Or to participate in a Dharma assembly? What kind of collective action would require all the swordsmen to go together? They didn't even leave a housekeeper behind? The flying boat started and disappeared into the cloud sea. It gradually accelerated until it was as fast as a flash of light. The weapons at the door were indeed extraordinary. But because they weren't the ones steering the boat, they had no idea where the destination was. 7 or 8 leaders walked in front of Lu Xiaoyi. Che Xia's face was gloomy. Boss, where are we going? Won't it be unsafe if no one stays at home? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Who said no one will stay? Isn't Master Mao a human? As for where we're going, we'll know when we get there. There's no point in asking too much. Don't worry, relax. Everyone has been in the shaking shadow realm for so many years. I know it's very boring. This time, I'll bring everyone to a place to have some fun. Outside the shaking shadow sword palace, an old figure stood alone. He was old and couldn't understand what the young people were thinking. It was too rash, but it seemed to make sense. He could only hope that everything would go smoothly. The shaking shadow sword palace couldn't afford another loss. Chapter 904. Lu Xiui didn't care about the swordsman's curiosity, and only focused on communicating with Snot. Snot bro, don't be so stingy. Show me the function of your treasure. Especially if someone sends a message out. Snot sighed. Don't call me senior bro. You're my senior bro. You order me around like a dog. Not only do I have to carry your boat, but I also have to help you find spies. I'll tell you how to use it. In terms of the flying boat's function, if my Qingwei immortal sect says we're second, no one would dare to say they're first. Especially your Xiaoyao travel team. After hundreds of thousands of years, you've been free and unfettered, but your ability hasn't improved at all. Lu Xiaoyi said meaningfully. Being free and unfettered is also a kind of gain. Do you dare to say that compared to being free and unfettered, your Qingwei immortal sect's gains are more important? Snot Bros said disdainfully. You're talking about the ancient cultivation era. Now the cultivation world is so complicated. Is it the same thing? If you really want to be free and unfettered, why do you want to borrow my airboat? That's right. That's right. Lu Xiaoyi never admitted defeat. This shows that you, Snot Bro, don't understand the true meaning of being free and unfettered. Doing whatever you want is also a kind of freedom. If I want to do it, I'll do it. This is my freedom. If you want to do it, can you do it? Do you dare to do it? While the two were bickering, the flying boat moved as fast as lightning, carrying a group of unknown swordsmen. By now, everyone had realized that something was wrong. This definitely wasn't a relaxing trip because the atmosphere wasn't right. Although their boss refused to tell them the truth, the cultivators had a premonition in their hearts. So far, only one person has sent a message out of the boat. Not bad, only 1 in 100 people. This is already very rare in a sect. He's stronger than your Xiaoyao travel team. Your Xiaoyao travel team is a big sieve. Of course, our Qingwei immortal sect isn't that strong either. Why don't you expose him now? Lu Xiaoyi looked ahead. I'll tell them our destination when we're halfway there. At that time, I'm afraid that there will be more secret messengers like this. We can't act rashly and alert them. Slug was very interested. Ear, how do you plan to deal with them? Was it to be exposed in public? Or was it done in secret? Forgive me for speaking bluntly, but you don't have much of a foundation at the shadow shaking stage. That's why you shouldn't tolerate and nurture a traitor. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. He knew what the slug meant. The large upper sect could tolerate these kinds of people because they were too large in size, and the core of their power was the power of the upper echelons. Thus, they could ignore some small bugs at the level of Jin Dan, and they would never be able to cleanse them. However, the shadow-shaking realm was different. Mixing dirt was the common practice of the upper sect. They had hundreds of thousands of years of history, and under their deep cultivation, no one knew where their hidden strength was. Their roots were intertwined, and they involved a lot of people. Therefore, even though Buddhism and the sword range had nothing to do with each other, it was not difficult for them to secretly support, nurture, and control a sword cultivator. When he had told Xie and the others that if they wanted to find a friend, they had to be quick, it was actually to prevent the Buddhist sect from infiltrating. They had to use time to reduce the Buddhist sect's huge influence. Even so, there were still Buddhist spies among the swordsmen he recruited. In theory, only the swordsmen who participated in the chessboard of heaven and earth with him were the most reliable, because almost everyone who went there had no regard for life or death. However, there could also be Buddhist spies among this group of people. The chessboard of heaven and earth had also been notified in advance. If the Buddhist sect wanted to meddle, they would have enough time to do so. There wouldn't be too many people like this, at most one or two. Because if there were too many people, should you kill them or not during the confrontation with the monks in the chessboard of heaven and earth? Kill, meddle in the sand for nothing. If you don't kill them, you can only let your monks admit defeat. He had to find this hidden danger, because to the current shaking shadow sect, they could not afford to fail once. If the news was leaked and they were surrounded, it would be a huge disaster. Thus, the reason why he did not reveal his destination was to make the swordsmen anxious and suspicious. Only under such circumstances would they make an irrational choice. He had only exposed one, and that was definitely not all. Eradicating this malignant tumor is not a good choice, because that would mean that the Buddhist sect would choose to nurture another malignant tumor. Compared to the vast resources of the Buddhist sect, the shaking shadow sect is nothing. The sword heart cannot replace everything. There will always be an extremely small number of people who cannot resist the temptation. On this point, even the upper sect cannot do it, let alone the side sect. With regards to the spies of other sects, the cultivation world, after accumulating a long period of experience, finally chose to tolerate and nurture the spies without prior consultation. This kind of method would at least allow them to accurately capture the traces of these spies, so that they would not be out of their control. They would also be able to use them to spread false information at crucial moments. Completely uprooting them was neither realistic nor smart, because you would have no choice but to focus all your energy on defending against the other party's endless attempts to rope them in. It would be very tiring, and the results would not be good. However, the upper sect did this because they had enough high-level cultivators to control the entire situation. What are you going to do? The Shaking Shadow sect only has Taoist Master Mao, and I don't think he has the ability to do this. Lu Xiaoyi knew what he meant. A good method was not something that anyone could use. The upper sect's large powers had this kind of foundation, but he did not. Thus, tolerating and nurturing spies was the same as nurturing spies for the current Shaking Shadow sect. He sighed. Let's give it a try. If we act openly now, it will be a psychological blow to these swordsmen. They will begin to doubt their companions around them, and this will negatively affect their future. The new Shaking Shadow sect has only been formed for a few decades, and they don't have any traditions to speak of, much less beliefs. If I kill them now as a warning, the disadvantages will far outweigh the benefits. This was a very real problem, but Lu Xiaoyi still had a backup plan, so he was not particularly worried. If in the future Yuanying began to appear among these swordsmen, that would be the time to completely resolve this problem. When the flying boat was halfway through its journey, Lu Xiaoyi announced their destination to the swordsmen. I know that everyone likes to travel, and it's already very stifling to live on a continent for a few decades. So this time, let's go and play to our heart's content. Don't all of you like to gamble on donkeys? Alright, let's go to Upper Forest Valley to gamble on donkeys. Lu Xiaoyi's explanation was not out of the swordsman's expectations. Almost everyone had guessed where they were going, but only when he actually said it out loud could they let their thoughts run wild. Feisha guessed. This definitely isn't purely for donkey gambling. It might just be a pretense, and the real goal is none other than the 7 small continents around Upper Forest. Show off your strength and find the culprit. However, isn't this a little too conspicuous? I think it's better to investigate thoroughly before striking like a thunderbolt. Chapter 905. After flying for 2 months, the Cloud Sea flying ship began to approach the Upper Forest Valley. Most of the swordsmen on the ship were familiar with the Cloud Sea sky region. Swordsmen, after all, were unruly by nature. How could they not gamble when they wandered the world? When they arrived, it was the annual season of the Upper Forest Valley's donkey gambling season. Every small continent had its own foundation. Most of them relied on resources, some relied on business, some relied on thighs, and some relied on killing and plundering. Everyone had their own way of survival. The 7 small continents around the Upper Forest Valley relied on gambling. Thus, it became the most famous gambling den in the upper realm of Zhou. Gambling, there was no time limit. In the upper forest 7 continents, there were countless gambling venues and gambling methods. Just like the gambling houses in the mortal world, there would always be one that was suitable for you and you would be willing to bet on it. However, these gambling methods could also be used in other small continents. The reason why this place was so prosperous was because most of the gamblers in Zhou gathered there. The gambling was bigger and more exciting. The reason why this place had such a high status in the gambling forest was because there was a method that other small continents could not do. Donkey gambling. The flying donkey was a strange creature from the upper forest 7 continents. It had many characteristics, such as the ability to fly. It had a strange temper and was a creature that was between a spiritual beast and a mortal beast. Because it had spiritual vigor in its body, it could fly when it reached adulthood. However, its spiritual intelligence was very low, and it could never learn to grow, let alone be tamed by humans. Therefore, it was very awkward. Mortals could not control it, and cultivators did not care about such a stupid thing. However, the cultivators of the upper forest 7 continents found a way to become rich. They used it to race donkeys. The method was very simple. They would hang a papaya that the donkey loved to eat in front of its head. In order to eat it, the donkey would run with all its might. It would run until it died of exhaustion. The papaya was the donkey's greatest pursuit in its life. Because it was rare, it would go crazy when it saw it, and would not care about anything else. It would no longer have a trace of spiritual intelligence. Moreover, due to its large size and special physique, it no longer accepted any spiritual opportunity into its body after it reached adulthood. Therefore, even cultivators couldn't stimulate it through other methods. To put it simply, as long as this thing ran for the papaya, unless it ate it, even immortals couldn't stop it. Either you eat it or you run to your death. It was precisely because of the donkey's stubbornness and inability to be manipulated that they became the best gambling tools. As long as you hung a papaya in front of your head, even the King of Heaven wouldn't be able to do anything to you. Upper Forest Valley was the best place to compete. Because it was located between the 7 small continents, it was affected by the atmosphere of each continent, and the sea of clouds here was especially thin. Every year in October, it would be sunny and cloudless, and visibility would be excellent. It was the best season for donkey racing. Among the 3,000 unorthodox groups, most of them were interested in this Tao. They gathered here, regardless of age, status, or rank. The stakes were huge, and winning a grand slam to win all the resources needed to form a nascent soul was nothing new at all. This was the only one of its kind, so everyone was scrambling for it. Their arrival was in October, but it was not a coincidence. It was deliberate. Lu Xiaoyi summoned Che Xie, Song Rong, and the other leaders. He instructed them. Senior brother Snot and I will go down and play a few rounds. You guys stay in the boat and don't go anywhere. Wait for my orders. Che Xie and the others had already guessed the boss's intentions. This was not a small matter of killing the guards, nor was it a brainless act of attacking the 7 little Lus. This was the rhythm of destroying Upper Forest Valley, the rhythm of this gambling event that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. They were all very excited, so they didn't care that Lu Xiaoyi didn't allow them to go out temporarily. They had endured for a few years, so why would they be afraid of a few short moments? Lu Xiaoyi and Snot got off the boat and flew in the direction of Upper Forest Valley. Behind them, the huge flying boat was hidden in the sea of clouds. The Qingwei Immortal Sect logo on it had long disappeared, and it had been replaced by an unfamiliar road sign. How much do you hate the human sect? I only asked you to hide the logo to avoid trouble, but I didn't ask you to frame me. Lu Xiaoyi complained. Snot laughed. You've used me so many times, and you don't allow me to form a gang with you? How can I use Qingwei's flying boat for free? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. This guy was right. In Taoism, one had to pick a side. Since he had chosen to be close to the Qingwei Immortal Sect, he had also decided to stay away from the human sect. It was impossible to have the best of both worlds. He was here to cause trouble. It was understandable that the other party had sent them all the way here with their own intentions. At their level, how could they be pure? Leaving the sword cultivators on the flying boat was a necessary choice. Firstly, he needed to find a reason that he could justify his actions. This was the truth of cultivation in the cultivation world. Everyone knew that the things that were used to cover their faces were fake, but you still had to do it. It was just like going to a casino in the mortal world. You always had to find a reason to ruin the place, such as mixing the dice with mercury, or the banker cheating, etc. Secondly, the other possible spy hadn't shown up yet. He didn't think that there was only one spy among the hundreds of people. There must be more. However, the remaining spies seemed to be very patient and didn't send out any information. Considering the psychological pressure he might cause to the spy, he left the airship with the slug and gave them some space to indulge themselves. The flying boat was very mysterious. It was set up with a hidden perception array. It was the work of a perfected cultivator, and it was not something that a small Jean Dan could discover. "Brother Snot, have you been here before? Have you tried donkey gambling?" Snot snorted. "I've been to all the famous places in the heavenly cycle of cycle. When I first became Jean Dan, I was young and energetic. I wandered around and was also a frequent visitor to Shan Lin Valley. However, I haven't set foot there for nearly 100 years. Once a person passes that stage, they no longer have any hobbies or interests. Why, is this your first time here? This is not the style of a wandering swordsman like you." Lu Xiai sighed. "I've been practicing the sword wholeheartedly and have no time to care about other things. Cultivation is very boring. Gambling has nothing to do with me. I'm not fated with beautiful women. I've lived my life in vain." Snot was disdainful. I've treated you as a friend, but you're lying so easily. You're not fated with beautiful women? You're so simple. How did you manage to deceive the most outstanding female cultivator in Huangting Taoism? Is that something that an honest person can do?" Lu Xiao's face was not red and his heart was not beating fast. "Nonsense. Brother Snot, how can you take my groundless accusations seriously? But this matter has nothing to do with being simple or not, right? Maybe she likes honest people like me, who can't do anything with 3 kicks." Snot snorted. "There are many honest, old-fashioned, serious, and upright people in Huangting Taoism. Why haven't I seen anyone succeed? How can an honest person like you succeed? There's a kind of cunning called honesty, and there's a kind of simplicity called shamelessness. Isn't that right?" Chapter 906. The two of them had not even flown for half an hour when the sea of clouds in front of them completely disappeared. What appeared before their eyes was a clear sky with no clouds in sight, and their field of vision was extremely wide. From afar, a path in the sky appeared before their eyes. However, it was different from the paths in the mortal world, because there was no road surface. There was only a cable on both sides of the path, outlining the shape of the path. The cable should be a cultivator's tool, and it was able to restrict the direction of the donkeys. The entire path was an incomparably huge oval, with a length of 100 li and a width of 50 li. The path itself was also 100 zhang wide, and it could accommodate dozens of donkeys running at the same time. When the two of them arrived, a donkey race was coming to an end. Dozens of donkeys several zhang long and several zhang tall were running along the path, and the gap between them had already widened. Amidst the cheers of tens of thousands of cultivators, each and every one of them ran until their eyes were bulging and their muscles were tangled up. They were panting heavily, all for the sake of the papaya melon that they would never be able to bite. This was truly a unique and good competition ground. Because the sky was clear, the cultivators could see the entire race with a single glance. Because the spectators were all cultivators, there was no need for a spectator stand. Everyone flew freely in the air. Not far from the oval track, there was a tall 3-story pavilion. That was also the place where cultivators placed their bets. There were over 100 cultivators serving the gamblers on the pavilion. Lu Xiaoyi noticed that most of the cultivators were actually Foundation establishment cultivators. Because this place was not part of the void, and because they were in the special space of Upper Forest Valley, there was no need to worry about the dangers of passing through the sea of clouds. This was a place for Foundation establishment cultivators to revel in. Even though their cultivation levels were low, their hearts for gambling were not inferior to their Golden Core seniors in the slightest. There were dreams here, and there was a feast of resources. As long as you could win once, you could harvest the spirit stones of tens of thousands of cultivators. This was a huge amount of wealth, and even a cultivator's state of mind could not resist such a temptation. Not everyone was Lu Xiaoyi. Orthodoxies did not have high requirements for resources, and they were born into great powers. Their spies were also from great powers, and now, they were even the rulers of a continent. For those unorthodox cultivators who came from unorthodox sects and had no backing, this was a shortcut for them to reach the heavens in a single bound. For a cultivator to be so passionate about gambling, this is a bit inconceivable, but this is the helplessness of the cultivation world. However, there is one good thing about gambling: very few people are addicted to it. In this regard, the self-control of cultivators is much stronger than that of mortals. After the competition ended, a few people were happy and many people were sad. After a short period of disappointment, the cultivators began to look at the next competition in a few hours until their pockets were empty, and they could no longer continue. It's chaotic, but it's also very exciting. The atmosphere is pretty good. Even I want to gamble once. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Slug looked at him speechlessly. You're clearly here to kill people, okay? He was just looking for an excuse to kill someone. He was just an evil guest who was hated by everyone here. In Upper Forest Valley, because it was not a closed area, the flow of people was too dense and the space was accessible in all directions. Therefore, there was no problem of people receiving guests. They could come and go as they pleased without anyone controlling them. This was also the reason why Slug wanted to remind this guy. If you want to make a move here and warn those who listen to the orders of the Buddhist sects, you must know the strength of the defense here and the number of Jin Dan people. Because it does not belong to the domain, according to Zhou Xian's rules, this is not a matter of the domain. Nascent soul cultivators cannot interfere. On this point, you chose Upper Forest Valley and not the 7 small continents. The general direction is right. Don't look at the cultivators in charge of betting on the balcony. They are basically Foundation establishment cultivators. They are just small fries who do chores and are not part of their strength. Look at those dressed in black with the 7 stars embroidered on their chests. They are the main force in charge of maintaining order in the Upper Forest race. There are about 500 of them, but that's just on the surface. There are also about 100 hidden guards in ordinary clothes mixed in with the gamblers. They are basically the main defensive force of the Upper Forest race track. There were over 10,000 cultivators in Upper Forest Valley, but less than 20% of the Jin Dan people were there. There were only about 2,000 of them, and they came from all over the world. They didn't know each other and didn't belong to any organization. In order to maintain order like this, 250 Jin Dan people were more than enough. It could even be said that it was quite extravagant. Although there were many gamblers, without an organization, they couldn't work together. Lu Xiaoyi asked, what percentage of the 7 continents in Upper Forest are these 200 Jin Dan people? Slug said, about 20 to 30%. This is what I want to tell you. You have to end the battle quickly. Upper Forest Valley is surrounded by the 7 continents. The distance is very close, so reinforcements will come very quickly. If you drag it out for too long, you will be easily surrounded and won't be able to escape. Let me say this first, there's no way my flying boat can charge in to save people. It's too big of a target. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Who needs you to save people? You can just be a spectator. If the situation is good, you can watch the show from the side and cheer for them. If the situation is bad, you can just go. This is what I want to tell you. Back then, I only wanted to borrow your flying boat and not your person, but you just had to come along. If Qingwei gets involved, it won't be easy to control. It's not good for the overall situation, it's not good for you, and it's also not good for my shadow-shaking realm. So don't think about saving people. The Jin Dan heavenly Tao that can threaten me hasn't been born yet. This dispute must be positioned as a gamble between little Lu and himself. This is the principle. Slug nodded. Although there were more than 200 guards here, they were all Jin Dan from little Lu's unorthodox sect, so their strength was a little weaker to begin with. With the sword vein and the addition of a big bug like One Ear, there wouldn't be any problems. The only question was how quickly they could resolve the situation. If they acted quickly, they would have a chance to calmly board the boat and leave. Causing trouble in Upper Forest Valley was to teach these fence-sitters a lesson so that other factions would not dare to easily provoke the shadow-shaking sword vein. This would give the swordsmen a relatively normal environment. This was the right thing to do. This was the reason why he was willing to send them on their way. The key was to grasp the scale. The so-called Little Lu, due to his own strength, position, and other reasons, did not completely follow the so-called cultivation rules of Zhou Xian. This was also a consistent characteristic of small factions. It was not unprecedented that they would go to great lengths to cultivate when they were in a hurry. Although they would be punished afterwards, they would still have to suffer during the battle. Therefore, the right way to go was to fight and leave. There was also a bottom line for provocation. In the face of the secret communication between Lin Qilu and Buddhism, as a Taoist faction, he was also very dissatisfied, but there was nothing he could do. On this point, he was very envious of One Ear's autonomy. He could fight and kill as he wished. Was this the so-called true meaning of freedom that he spoke of? The Cloud Sea flying boat could prevent Jin Dan from spreading news outside, but it could not prevent him from sending news himself. As early as the beginning of the journey, he had already sent a message back to the sect. It had already been 2 months. If the sect wanted to respond, they would definitely have made preparations in advance. If they just wanted to see a joke, although he had not known One Ear for long, he understood that he was a lawless guy who did not mind causing trouble. He only hoped that there would not be any uncontrollable trouble. Chapter 907. Place a bet? Lu Xiaoyi's interest was piqued. Slug's mouth twitched. When it came to betting on donkey racing, he was a veteran. Although he hadn't done it for 100 years, his experience was incomparably rich. Back in the Upper Forest Valley, he was one of the famous gamblers. He had made a lot of bets, and it was unknown how much better he was than this guy who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You don't even know what the rules are, and you want to make a bet to earn money? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Don't I still have you? Come, tell me. Slug had no choice but to give this layman some general knowledge about donkey racing. When it comes to donkey racing, there are actually 2 most important points. First, you have to choose a donkey that is strong enough. After all, if everyone's desire for the papaya is at the same level, the final winner will definitely be the strongest donkey. This is because they have to run a full 10 laps on this track. This was not a simple matter. Even if a Jin Dan stage cultivator could judge the muscles, bones, blood vessels, and tendons of a donkey through his divine sense, the organizer would definitely choose a dozen donkeys that were closest to each other in terms of strength to compete with each other. After they were carefully selected, the gambler's judgment space was actually very limited. They could only rely on their own judgment. In this aspect, body meridians are the best, and other orthodoxies are slightly inferior. Thus, there is a saying in donkey racing, if you don't know which donkey to choose, just follow the body cultivators and choose. Lu Xiaoyi doubtfully asked. Is there really no possibility of tampering with the donkeys? Slug explained. No. This creature is the stupidest, most stubborn, and most unreasonable spirit beast I have ever seen. Any kind of control is not worth mentioning in front of their desire for the papaya, and this is in terms of their mental state. In terms of their physical state, donkey racing has been going on for tens of thousands of years, and cultivators have a deep understanding of it. With their divine sense, there is nothing that can be hidden from tens of thousands of eyes. Furthermore, it is completely unnecessary. The organizers can earn a huge amount of spirit stones from donkey racing, so why would they be willing to take the risk of controlling it? Once it's discovered, our reputation will be damaged and our customers will decrease. The loss is much greater than the loss of a single competition. So, you don't have to worry about this problem at all. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. That's true. I was being too paranoid. As long as a place like a casino can gather popularity, there's no need to cheat. It's a business that's guaranteed to be profitable. Slug snorted. At least this guy wasn't stupid. The second point is the betting rules. 12 donkeys in a round. This was a small round. 36 hunchbacks. This was a big round. The odds were different. There were 2 rounds a day, one big and one small. For example, the round that just ended was a big round, then the next round would be a small round. The odds were much lower. There were many ways to place bets, including single bets and combination bets. Single bets were to bet on which side would be the first, or which side would be the last. There were many combinations of bets, such as the top 3. Wei San? Top 5? Wei Wu? Wait a minute, the more combinations there were, the higher the odds. The possibility of guessing correctly was small. Among them, the one with the highest odds was 12 consecutive bets. That is to say, it's almost impossible for you to guess the ranking of all the hunchbacks. In any case, I haven't heard of it in 10,000 years. It's just a gimmick. Lu Xiaoyi was quite serious. Then how much should I pay? Slug laughed. 100,000 times. That is to say, if you bet 1 spirit stone on 12 consecutive bets and luckily win, you'll get 100,000 spirit stones. Isn't that very tempting? You don't really think you can win, do you? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Everyone has to have dreams. Otherwise, what's the difference between you and a salted fish? What if you win? I'm a little worried that your flying boat might not be able to hold all of them. Slug didn't want to say anything more. This was a man-an. How could you communicate with a man-an normally? The 2 of them came to the donkey pen. Almost all the gamblers had gathered here. They needed to make the most detailed and profound observation of the 12 donkeys to judge the minute differences between each donkey. Finally, they would use this as the basis for their bets. Of course, they couldn't get close or touch the donkeys. From a considerable distance, they used their divine sense to examine the donkeys. Lu Xiaoyi was also mixed in with the crowd. However, his ability in this aspect was very awkward. He didn't understand the Tao of spirit beasts and was unfamiliar with donkeys. He was far from being comparable to the other gamblers. Seeing that everyone else was concentrating on the donkeys, he poked Slug next to him. Hey, why do I feel like these 12 donkeys all look the same? Apart from the numbers on them being different. Slug was very disdainful. Brute. Crude. Of course you don't understand such profound things. You only know how to wave your knife. Don't bother me. Wait for me to sort out my thoughts. You can just bet with me. I don't dare to say that I'm 90% sure, but I don't think I'll be too far off. Back then, Lu Xiaoyi turned his head and ignored him. After bragging for so long, he didn't even have a decent result. With Slug's personality, if he had guessed correctly once, he would have bragged about it long ago. Why would he say something so insignificant now? He was also good at talking, bullying him for not understanding the Tao. Thus, he continued to observe the donkeys. Muscles, bones, blood vessels, and tendons. It wasn't that he didn't understand at all. At the level of Jin Dan, he still had the basic ability to observe and judge. It was just that he wasn't so detailed. Moreover, it was his first time coming into contact with such creatures. He didn't know which muscles were more important in a competition. Thus, he could only observe what he really understood, such as fate. Since they were spirit beasts, they naturally had fate. Lu Xiaoyi could clearly see this. He was the only one among the tens of thousands of cultivators present. Moreover, he had the ability to change things. In his eyes, the fate of these spirit donkeys was pitifully little compared to humans. It was also in line with the position of these creatures. Moreover, he could vaguely determine that the fate of these donkeys had a lot to do with the papaya. No wonder these things were so desperate when they saw the papaya. It seemed that they weren't stupid. They knew that the papaya was a great supplement for them, and could determine the development of their spiritual intelligence. Very interesting. He suddenly had a very interesting idea. If he erased the fate of these donkeys, would they still desperately chase after the papaya? It was worth a try. A crazy and bold idea took shape in his mind. If the luck of these 12 donkeys was decreased one by one, would it affect their desire for the papaya? Would it affect the results of the competition? Judging from the results of the previous competition, the 36 donkeys didn't have a big gap in the end. They had to run 10 laps around a large circle with a diameter of nearly 100 miles. In the end, they didn't completely pull away from each other. This could only mean that the difference in the physique of the donkeys was very small. Then, could the spiritual needs of the donkeys be a decisive factor in the results? Comparing a donkey that desperately wanted to eat the papaya and a donkey that could eat or not eat, who would run faster? Was there a need to guess? Chapter 908. Number 3, Number 4, and Number 12 are the 3 strongest ones. Number 1, Number 6, and Number 11 are the weakest ones. You can bet according to my judgment. You can place a single bet, a combination bet, or a split bet. Remember, if you win, you have to give me half of it. Slug didn't hide his judgment. Of course, his so-called judgment was only SOSO, and it was about the same level as the other gamblers present. It's the same as not saying anything. With your past record, I dare to bet that if I choose the other 6 donkeys, my chances of winning are much higher than yours. Now that they were familiar with each other, it was inevitable that they would attack each other. Slug wanted to refute, but he couldn't avoid the fact that he had never won anything in the donkey race. However, he still stubbornly said, "I've won the first prize, and more than once." As soon as Lu Shui heard his tone, he knew what was going on. "Snot senior brother, can we not deceive ourselves? If I bet on 12 donkeys at once, wouldn't I also hit the jackpot with the highest payout? What's the point? The odds of winning the grand prize are only 5 times. If I bet 1 spirit stone, I'll get 1.5 spirit stones. Who will I look for the remaining 10.5 spirit stones? I can see that the organizers are desperately trying to lower the odds of a single bet, but raising the odds of a combination bet. They're using a huge reward to attract people, and they can't wait for everyone to bet 12 times in a row. If a donkey has a papaya hanging in front of its head, it'll run for its life. How strong are humans? It's just that they're using spirit stones, and they're using an invisible method," Slug said angrily. "Are you going to bet or not? You're the one who wants to come here. You're the one who doesn't know the rules. You're the one who's talking so much nonsense and pretending to know the rules of the world. If you don't want to be a donkey, then let's go back together." Lu Xiao laughed. "Haha, it's okay to be a donkey once in a while and experience the joy of being a donkey, as long as you don't always be a donkey. Brother Slug, you go first. I'll see how you're going to bet." Slug was disdainful. After acting all high and mighty for so long, didn't he still have to look at him? The 2 of them arrived at the betting area and chose an empty spot. It was still early before the start of the game, and most of the gamblers were still anxiously calculating and debating. This place was very quiet. Only the most confident gamblers and rookies were impatient. Slug displayed his bets. According to his judgment of the donkey's strength, he placed 10 consecutive bets, all of which were 3 consecutive bets, first 3 bets, second 3 bets, first 1 bets, second 2 bets, and so on. This wasn't just a question of choosing a pair of donkeys. They also had to consider their ranking. There was a requirement to arrange a combination, which was quite difficult. Slug still had some experience. Veteran gamblers would usually choose 3 consecutive bets. The probability of winning was higher, and the odds were also guaranteed. They weren't like those rookies who went for 10 consecutive bets or 12 consecutive bets. The odds were very attractive. If you won once, you wouldn't have to worry about the upper realm. The problem was, would you win? Every bet was 10 top-grade spirit stones, so there were a total of 100 spirit stones. This was already considered a large sum among gamblers. Not every cultivator had the financial resources of a core disciple. For example, those foundation establishment cultivators used high-grade and middle-grade spirit stones to bet. There were even some who used low-grade spirit stones to bet. Don't think you can win in one go! Entertainment is entertainment. Small bets are fun, but large bets are harmful to the body. Slug had the attitude of an experienced gambler. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a moment. His personality was to pursue stability when he was small, and craziness when he was large. He touched the storage ring on his hand. It had been 300 years since Jin Dan, and he basically didn't have any large external wealth. However, his expenses weren't large either. Orthodoxy, like the swordsman, didn't have much need for external resources compared to Dharma cultivators, especially after they didn't need to inscribe sword formations. The only time he needed materials was when he stole them for free. Therefore, after 300 years, he had accumulated a considerable amount of wealth. As for the spirit stones, he counted them. There were about 10,000 top-grade spirit stones, and he had an average of 30 per year. This income really wasn't high. These things weren't of much use in Yuanying, and he still had to exchange them for jade purity. Therefore, he had to find an opportunity to spend them. The cultivator in charge of the reception felt as if a small mountain had been piled up on the stone table in front of him. The sight of 10,000 top-grade spirit stones piled up together was extremely shocking. Sir, you are placing a bet. What, is there a limit to the amount of bets you can place in Upper Forest Valley? Lu Xiaoyi acted like a generous guest. The foundation establishment cultivator nodded like a chick pecking at rice, then shook his head. How many years had it been since he'd met such a generous guest? He really didn't treat spirit stones as spirit stones, but as stones. No limit. However, this cultivator's authority is not enough. I'll call the martial uncles here on behalf of the guest. The cultivator hurriedly sent out a message. The amount of bets this time was too large, almost comparable to the total amount of a donkey race. This wasn't something he could handle. One less spirit stone was equivalent to his entire year's salary. You're crazy! The snob bug felt that this wasn't something a normal person could do. Even if you haven't gambled before, you should have heard of it, right? With Jin Dan's level of insight, how could he do such a brainless thing? If you think it's inconvenient to carry around too many spirit stones, you can leave them with me. Why give them to the gambling house for free? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. If I leave them with you, what are the odds? I'll definitely win this bet. The snot bug was completely speechless. However, he immediately understood that this guy wasn't really gambling, but setting a trap for the gambling house. Since he wanted to cause trouble, he had to have a reason. If he didn't pay enough, it wouldn't be good to fall out with him, so he had to make a big bet. After thinking it through, the snot bug was too lazy to persuade him anymore. He thought that the next step would be to cause trouble. He felt a bit of heartache. Those 100 spirit stones were wasted. If they fought, who would pay him back? However, what method was this guy going to use to cause trouble? He still hadn't figured it out, so he could only wait and see. Soon, the 3 hosts, Jin Dan, flew over. Seeing the pile of top-grade spirit stones, they felt dizzy. The leader walked over and bowed respectfully. This was a super big customer, so he had to serve him well. Honored guests, it's my honor to have you come to my Upper Forest Valley. How many spirit stones do you have here? It was a gambling house, so according to the rules, one couldn't inquire about the other party's name or origin. This was a rule. The gambling house especially valued privacy. They knew that the customer cared about this, so they didn't say anything to curry favor with him. If they were to become related to a certain cultivator from the upper forest valley, then would they earn the spirit stones or not? 10,000 top-grade spirit stones! Lu Xiaoyi looked like a nouveau riche. Wait a moment. We have to check the rules of upper forest. Please don't blame us. The three of them used their divine sense to carefully check the number and quality of the spirit stones. This was an essential procedure. The Foundation establishment cultivator offered them top-grade spirit tea. Whether they drank it or not was another matter. This was a matter of attitude. The surrounding gamblers also realized the abnormality of this betting spot. Slowly, many people gathered around. Of course, they kept a suitable distance. Someone exclaimed, "Oh my God! Isn't this 10,000 top-grade spirit stones? If I had this much wealth, why would I come here? I don't know if this person is depositing his spirit stones here and slowly betting? Or is it a shuttle?" Chapter 909. Very quickly, the three hosts Jean Dan finished counting and nodded to each other. There were tens of thousands of them, not one less. They were of high quality, and had never been used before. Jean Dan, the leader, smiled until his eyes became slits. "How do you plan to bet? How many rounds? How much do you want to bet? We take special care of our esteemed guests. We have specialized explanations and donkey grooms to provide you with advice. We also have discount coupons for a 1-month tour of the 7 continents of the upper forest, free of charge for food and lodging, and—" Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand and said in an imposing manner, "How many rounds? How much do you want to bet? My time is precious. I still have 10 billion worth of business waiting for me. Every minute and second is a loss of tens of thousands of spirit stones. How can I waste my time on you? Let's go to the next round. 12 rounds, all in one go." Snotbug's cheek twitched. "Brag. Brag as much as you can. Every minute and second is a loss of tens of thousands of spirit stones? 2 months on the flying boat, other than chatting all day long, what kind of income do you have? Playing 6 rounds of gambling and still acting shamelessly even after losing a single spirit stone, how thick is this person's face?" Host Jean Dan did not have any intention of making fun of him. Many years of experience in managing gambling dens made them deeply understand the principle that those who came did not come with good intentions, and those who came did not come with good intentions. Either he was truly rich, or he must have some tricks up his sleeve. Donkey racing in the upper forest had been going on for tens of thousands of years. Countless people had come here to try their luck using various methods, but who had come out with good results? When it came to gambling on donkeys, which cultivator was more familiar than them, the managers of gambling dens? The three of them were unmoved. They could not lose in terms of imposing manner. This was also the rule of gambling dens. Because they believed that imposing manner would affect fate. "How do we do it? 12 rounds, please ask for instructions." In the eyes of these masters, the donkey's grooming, selection, personality and habits, physical strength, and even the degree of resistance to big situations were all in their hearts. Therefore, internally, they actually had a rough ranking of these 12 donkeys. From the past, the accuracy was not low. If this fellow's order of combination was highly consistent with their internal ranking, then it meant that there was a mole among them. Regarding this, they also had their own way of dealing with it. Lu Xiaoyi said casually, "It's simple. I bet that the one with the number 1 will be the first, the one with the number 2 will be the second, and so on. Of course, the one with the number 12 will be the duck. 12 times in a row, 10,000 top-grade spirit stones for a shuttle. Let me think. If I win, how much can I get?" One of the hosts, Jean Dan, answered for him. "If you win, you should get 1 billion top-grade spirit stones." Lu Xiaoyi was a little worried. "So many? Can you take it out later?" The 3 Jean Dan members looked at each other and smiled. "We can afford it. The upper forest valley has been in business for tens of thousands of years, and there has never been a time where we can't afford to bet. Then, shall we personally make a series of bets for you? Lu Xiaoyu waved his hand, completely unconcerned. Hurry up and do it. I'm earning tens of thousands every second. The 3 Jin Dan disciples took out the highest quality purple jade and used the most precise brushstrokes to carve a note on it. For the sake of clarity, they didn't even use a brush. This was to prevent this fellow from going back on his word. 1 billion top-grade spirit stones? Of course, they couldn't afford it. Not to mention the current Upper Forest Valley, even if they searched all the 7 small continents of Upper Forest, it would be impossible to gather it in a short period of time. This was the problem of circulating funds. But the key point was that it was impossible for this kind of 12 bets to hit. It was completely different from their internal ranking. For some reason, they had even arranged the order according to the number plate on the donkey's body. The number plate was only for the convenience of distinguishing, it wasn't arranged according to strength. Everyone knew this principle. How could there be a donkey betting like this? It was simply giving away spirit stones for free. How could a Jin Dan be so stupid? This was the only thing they had to worry about. But with such a huge sum of money, how could they think so much? Could they just push it away and not want it? There were more than 200 guards in the Upper Forest Valley, as well as tens of thousands of gamblers. With so many people around, how could these 2 meatheads overturn the heavens? In an instant, the contract was established. On it was clearly written all the restrictions of this bet. It was the highest level of bets that could be enjoyed only when the amount reached a certain level. Both sides verified that there was no mistake and signed an oath. In the cultivation world, this was something that could never be changed. The more Slug looked at it, the more he felt that something was wrong. You've already signed an oath, so how can you still cause trouble? If you really started to fight, it wouldn't make sense and you'd become a robber. The more he looked, the more confused he became. He didn't expect that the 3 Upper Forest cultivators would suddenly project this contract on the screen above the 3-story building without asking for their opinion. This time, the entire Upper Forest Valley was in an uproar. How many years had it been since such a huge amount of bets was seen? 100 years? 1,000 years? 10,000 years? Such a strange betting method. How many years has it been since such a retard appeared in the cultivation world? The Upper Forest cultivators did this to solidify the contract, so that this idiot wouldn't have any room to maneuver, and to obtain the moral support of all the gamblers present. Once the bets were made, there would be no return. Slug was very dissatisfied. Isn't it a little petty for your family to do this? The leader Jin Dan's attitude was very humble and sincere, but he didn't give in at all. Honored guests, please calm down. This is also the rule of my Upper Forest donkey racing. Some large bets must be made public. Actually, the intention is to urge us masters to not privately pocket the bets and not admit to it. How was this urging the masters? It was clearly urging the gamblers. Lu Xiaoyu pulled the scolding Slug away, still pretending to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's just the money for a meal. Why get angry with them? Slug was so angry that he almost cursed out loud. What the F***ck did you eat to spend 10,000 supreme-grade spirit stones? He ate and drank for free on the flying boat for 2 months and didn't even pay for a single meal. He ate with a clear conscience and was still picky. Now that he came out, he started to poke green onions into his pig nose. He couldn't hand over this person anymore. He was already crazy. The 3 Upper Forest cultivators Jin Dan stood there respectfully, watching them leave. One of the Jin Dan said, "Why do I feel that something is wrong? There must be something wrong with the abnormality. Could there be some kind of trouble? Is there something we can't guess?" Another one also said, "That can't be. How can a Jin Dan cultivator be an idiot? Even if you really eat 10,000 spirit stones for a meal, there's no need to show off here, right? Speaking of which, have you eaten a meal worth 100 supreme-grade spirit stones before?" The leader Jin Dan smiled slightly. "Who cares about him? What you're worried about is that if he guessed correctly, How will we pay for it? Is that possible? Before the donkey racing started, I had junior brother Hans secretly change the number plates of the donkeys when he drove them into the field. Even if he's an immortal and has methods we can't see through, what can he do to us? The three of them looked at each other and smiled. Gambling houses might not often cheat, but gambling houses would definitely have tricks up their sleeves. This was something that could never be changed. Just like these 10 donkeys, there were a few that were indistinguishable from each other in terms of appearance and character. Even these masters couldn't see through them at a glance if they didn't look carefully. When driving the donkeys onto the track, they used special methods and didn't even need to change the number plates. The number plates themselves could be changed automatically without anyone noticing. When the donkeys started running on the track, who would notice the difference between them? Their blood surged and their muscles bulged. Even these masters couldn't do anything. It was flawless. Chapter 9-10. Slug didn't want to say anything. He had been thinking about the purpose of this one year. How could a person who could summon the wind and rain in the Tai-Pu realm and turn the world upside down fail in such a simple task? He didn't seem to be crazy. At least, this guy didn't lend him any spirit stones when he asked. He was very stingy. For a cultivator of his level to be unable to see through this person, what kind of medicine was he selling in his gourd? He could guess that this guy wanted to make a move on the entire upper forest cultivator group. He could also guess that this guy was creating an open and above-board reason. However, this had nothing to do with him being a gambling donkey. If it turned into a bandit's act, it would be a failure. Because there was no moral reason, many forces who might be inclined to Taoism couldn't make a move. If they made a move, they would be the accomplice of a villain. Everyone was a decent person who wanted to save face, so they had to pay attention to a good reason. Unless this guy's bet was really right. Then, the upper forest Chilu continent definitely couldn't take out 1 billion top-grade spirit stones. Not to mention them, even the 9 great sects probably didn't have that many spirit stones. If they couldn't take it out, it would be written in black and white, and the contract would be set by the heavens. Would it be like this? For 10,000 years, no one had heard of someone who could cheat in the upper forest donkey race. And it was such an unscrupulous and undisguised behavior? Then, what role should he play in this? Seeing Slug turn around and leave, Lu Xiaoyu was very puzzled. What are you doing? Slug didn't even turn his head. I'm going to the banker. There were 100 people, and there were all kinds of people. There was no lack of gamblers who were willing to gamble and profit from the fire. Their simple thinking was that since someone dared to bet 10,000 spirit stones on 12 consecutive bets, there must be a deep reason. They didn't need to figure out what the reason was. For gamblers, following the bet was the right thing to do. There was a very simple psychological hint here. Usually, they wouldn't do this, but now they could comfort themselves. Since the other party could afford to lose 10,000 spirit stones, what was a few hundred spirit stones to them? In the beginning, there were only a few bold people who participated, but in the end, almost everyone followed the crowd and bought a sequence of 2 spirit stones for 12 consecutive bets, as if they weren't real gamblers if they didn't buy. The organizers of Shanglin immediately felt the pressure. Even if only a small part of the 10,000 people placed bets, there were still hundreds of thousands of people who placed bets. Now, almost all the gamblers had placed bets, and the bets added up to another 10,000 top-level spirit stones. The results were arranged according to the numbers. In other words, if this result really happened, the Upper Forest Gambling Hall would have to pay a compensation of 2 billion spirit stones. This huge sum of money was enough to make a few little Lus go bankrupt. It was terrible. But this was only in theory. Just in case, Donkey had to change his number. The atmosphere in the Upper Forest donkey racing ground began to turn strange. The cultivators there could not wait to see the final result. As the biggest sucker there, Lu Xiaoyu became the target of public criticism. Thankfully, there were only a limited number of people who knew him. The few times he had been in the limelight were all in the heaven and earth chessboard, so there were no spectators. Time slowly passed as the crowd waited in anticipation. The second match of the day was about to begin. The first to light up were the two cables that circled the race track. After they were connected to the spiritual opportunity, they shone brightly and emitted a force field, causing the entire race track to form a large closed oval. Then, under everyone's gaze, 12 donkeys were led over. In the short time it took to go from the fence to the starting point, 4 of the donkeys' numbers had been changed. Because the time was too short, and the organizers had deliberately sped up, everything was done secretly and smoothly. The 12 donkeys were fixed in a special box, waiting for the whistle to signal the start of the race. Very standard. There are talented people in Shamlin. Lu Xiai sighed. Slug snorted. No matter how stupid they are, if you let them operate for 10,000 years, they will naturally have their own set of things. It's not surprising. In Lu Xiaoyi's eyes, a telescopic frame was fixed on the donkey's back. After the start of the race, a papaya would be placed on top of the telescopic frame. Because of the adjustment of the telescopic frame, the donkeys couldn't bite it no matter how long they stretched their necks. Therefore, they could only run with all their might and stretch their necks as much as they could. He keenly felt that the donkeys were different, not through their skin and muscles, but through the size of the faded clouds in their brains. It seemed different from before and didn't match their numbers. Although he didn't know much about donkey racing, he understood people's hearts. He immediately knew that the organizers were secretly doing something. He smiled contemptuously. How stupid would he be to do something to the donkey's faded clouds? He was just experimenting with one of the donkeys. When it came to cheating, he was very talented. He knew that if he started right from the start, it would be easy for others to see through him. There were a total of 10 laps. If the first lap wasn't over, and the 12 donkeys ran out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, wouldn't it be obvious that they were cheating? Therefore, he definitely couldn't start too early. His judgment was to start when they were more than halfway through the race. First, he would make rough adjustments, pushing the smaller ones to the front and dragging the bigger ones behind. In the last lap, or even half a lap, he would make fine adjustments and run out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Anyway, his current Sparrow Palace's ability to adjust their faded clouds was far enough, especially for these donkeys that had no resistance at all. Following the sound of a bell, under the control of the cultivators, a papaya was placed on top of each donkey's telescopic frame. It was tightly held by the hooks at the top. Open the gate and let the donkeys out. A huge clamor arose. The 12 donkeys were like arrows released from a bow. Their forehooves flapped as they followed the wide path that the cable led them towards the papaya in their hearts. Cheers came one after another. This place carried the dreams of every cultivator that wanted to reap without sowing, the hope of becoming rich overnight. Lu Xiaoyi sighed and looked at the snotty fellow beside him who was equally calm. Snotty bro, why don't they eat each other's papaya? I can't bear to see such cruelty. Because they're not 12 in one ear. I say, can you not ask such insignificant questions? Can you not pretend to be benevolent and hypocritical? Isn't it good to be a little more straightforward? If these donkeys fall into the hands of the people of Upper Forest, they at least have something to strive for, even if it's illusory. But if they fall into the hands of people like you, they can only become donkey meat roasted. Lu Xiaoyi curled his lips. This guy was so angry that he was a little delirious. He kept asking him to pay for the travel expenses and food expenses. He was also a person with spiritual eyes. He didn't have the slightest demeanor of a person who came to visit. Snotty bro, how much did you bet? Snotty originally didn't want to say, but there was nothing to hide. Who asked him to be a little impulsive the second time. It was too late to regret it later. 1,000 top-grade pieces. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Then the compensation from the people of Upper Forest will be the expenses for my travel and food expenses. It's also 100 million top-grade pieces. How can your lousy boat be worth the ticket? The food is monotonous and tasteless, there isn't even a place for entertainment, and there are no beauties to serve you. How can it be worth 100 million? Who knows, you might have to give me some back later. Chapter 9:11. The two of them bickered and refused to give in to each other. While they bickered, the 12 donkeys had already run several laps. Just as Lu Xiaoyi had expected, they were biting each other to death. The distance between the first and the youngest was only a few hundred feet. Changes could happen at any time. Look, aren't the donkeys I pointed out to you right? Damn it, why was I so obsessed that I didn't believe in myself and instead believed in a lunatic like you? Slug regretted his actions. The donkeys that he pointed out when he judged the strength of the donkeys were either in front or behind. Just as he had predicted, although it was still early and he could not make a conclusion, the trend was right. Therefore, he regretted that he had been blinded by this lunatic's 10,000 spirit throw. With those spirit stones, he could have made a lot of money by betting on his judgment. Lu Xiaoyi did not expose him. This was just pure luck. The numbers of several donkeys had changed and were no longer the same as before. It had nothing to do with his judgment. You're following so closely. Could it be that you can't widen the gap in the end? Snot said hatefully. Of course you can't. This is the reason why people in Upper Forest must choose donkeys with similar strength to participate in the competition. Otherwise, what's the fun if the seats are decided early? It must be exciting to have a winner at the end. Only then will people be willing to take out their spirit stones to bet. Only then will they think that their judgment is actually not bad and that they are just a little bit lacking in luck. Lu Xiaoyi replied with an, "Oh," but his expression began to become serious. Brother Snot, there's not much time left. Soon, it will be time for the battle. It's not that I don't trust you. These Jin Dan are not a challenge to us at all. The point is, it's not suitable for the Qingwei immortal sect to show their help now. It's better for you to help us in the dark than to stand out directly. This is a dispute between the 3,000 side sections. It's not suitable for us to join in. You know what I mean? Snot was stunned. He thought that he would have to wait until the result of the competition was out. He didn't expect it to be so fast. This bastard. If he had said so earlier, he wouldn't have made the bet at this time. Although he was a core member of the upper sect, Jin Dan, spirit stones did not grow on trees. He cursed as he walked away. This time, he was really unlucky to have met this person. Not only did he pay for the flying boat, he also paid for the food, he also paid for the time, and now he was even paying for the spirit stones. However, he also knew that on a strategic level, it was not appropriate for him to stand together with this man. Otherwise, if they were to fight, how could he, as their companion, explain himself? Hence, he changed his position to watch the match. Across the oval track, he distanced himself far away. Who cares? He deserved to be beaten to death. How dare he take advantage of him? He, the slug, had always been the one who took advantage of others in Qingwei, but now he was here. Of course, he also knew that even if there were a few hundred Jin Dan besieging a single swordsman, with the abilities he had displayed in the Tai Pu realm, nothing would happen to him. After all, the swordsman was unfathomable. How many enemies could he face at the same time? With this delay, the donkeys found a suitable position and ran a few more laps. Up until now, there were only 3 laps left. In theory, the current ranking was basically in its embryonic form. There wouldn't be any major changes. The changes were only in the details. For example, it was basically impossible for the person in first place to fall to last place. The person in first place now was number 12. The person in second place was number 1. This was exactly in line with his initial judgment. If there weren't any major changes, his combination of 100 spirit stones would definitely be a win. However, with the additional 1,000 spirit stones, he couldn't earn it back no matter what. This madman was really infuriating. The donkeys were still running with all their might, each of them with bulging eyes and crooked mouths. The shouts of the surrounding cultivators began to grow louder. Everyone was talking about the donkey they had bet on, as if the donkey could hear their voices and turn them into motivation. However, the slug's attention wasn't on the donkeys. He had extended his divine sense extremely far away, into the thick sea of clouds. His flying boat was there, as well as hundreds of murderous swordsmen. They should have come out by now, right? They should start to move here. By the time the competition ends, the ship will have sailed and the situation will have been decided. In terms of morality, they wouldn't be able to stand on their side. It was still not too late to launch a surprise attack while the competition was still going on. The shouts of the surrounding cultivators became abnormally excited and frenzied, forcing the slug to focus his attention back on the track. There were only 2 laps left, but there was an unexpected change on the track. This was also the reason why the surrounding cultivators couldn't control themselves and were shouting. The original order had been disrupted for no reason, and it was completely different from the previous round. The most obvious change was that number 12, who had been leading the pack, had fallen to the middle, while number 1, who had always been the youngest, had rushed to the middle and was squeezed together. What in the world happened? What was the reason for such a drastic change in the track? This kind of situation was very rare, but it wasn't like it had never happened before. The slug was focused on the track and didn't have the time to think about why the swordsmen hadn't arrived yet. The 12 donkeys were sprinting into the last lap. What made everyone dumbfounded was that number 1 was running faster and faster, gradually overtaking the other donkeys, one after another. Looking at its momentum, it seemed that it wouldn't stop until it got first place. On the other hand, number 12, who was originally outstanding, was falling behind and was gradually being overtaken by the donkeys behind him. If one were to describe the whole group of donkeys, the slug suddenly realized that those with numbers in front were running in front, and those with numbers behind were lagging behind. Even if there was a disorder, this disorder was constantly being corrected. It was too unbelievable. This lunatic, how did he do it? Could it be the reincarnation of the Donkey King? A divine donkey descending to the mortal world? Oh my God, I might also earn 100 million spirit stones! Things had already reached this point, and he didn't need to wait for the results anymore. Things were obvious. When they hit the line, it would definitely be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There was no mistake. In other words, the Upper Forest Valley competition would owe the lunatic 1 billion top-grade spirit stones. At the same time, he would owe the daring gamblers 1 billion top-grade spirit stones. That included his 100 million. In other words, the lunatic had already stood firmly on the moral side. Next was to repay the debt, and if he didn't, he would use a knife. Perfect. After getting a windfall, he still wanted to kill people, and he was still reasonable. Things in this world were so inconceivable. The slug laughed out loud and joined the ranks of the cheers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go up the mountain to kill the tiger. 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, let's celebrate. In the deafening cheers of the tens of thousands of cultivators, the donkeys obediently lined up in a neat row. Number 1 was at the front, number 12 was at the bottom, and they started to hit the line in succession. Among the cheers, hundreds of Upper Forest cultivators were pale. The leader was dazed. In an instant, he made the Upper Forest 7 continents bankrupt. How is this possible? How is this possible? It shouldn't be. The heavens don't have eyes. Chapter 9:12. P.S. Uncle calculated with his fingers, there will be a threshold when he reaches 135 years of age. When the last donkey hit the line, the outcome was set. It was time for the bankruptcy liquidation. The Upper Forest cultivators were completely unable to react to such a drastic change. Even if they reacted, what could they do? Could it be that they had to personally catch a few donkeys and forcefully change the rankings? Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, they could not do anything. Just as their faces were pale and they were unable to keep track of time, A flashy voice resounded through the entire venue. The Upper Forest Race Track, reputation above all. 10,000 years of legacy, unparalleled in the world. I am personally willing to receive the compensation after the winners of the bets. Let everyone come first. Shadow Sword Palace, fair and generous. Benefiting the masses, who else but me? The tens of thousands of gamblers let out a resounding cheer. This was a very important sentence. Everyone knew that not to mention 1 billion supreme-grade spirit stones, even 100 million upper forest cultivators could not afford it now. Hence, if that rich guest were to pay first, how long would these small bets have to wait? After a few days, when the commotion died down, it was very possible that they would renege on their debts. This person's declaration immediately won the respect of all the cultivators present. They looked at him in a new light. His Tao was gathered in one body, and no one could take it away. The snot bug in the crowd sighed. This lunatic was truly sinister and ruthless to the extreme. Just like how the heaven and earth reversal in the Tai Pu realm prevented the monks from escaping, if these upper forest cultivators did not run now, none of them would be able to escape. This person could not be an enemy. If they were to suffer a little loss, then so be it. They could just treat it as doing good deeds to buy safety. The key was that the traps came one after another. Calling out the Shadow Sword Palace was not a slip of the tongue, but a deliberate provocation when the other party was distracted. If the upper forest cultivators were calm enough, they should not care about their reputation and directly run back to the 7 small continents, relying on the Yuanying spiritual masters on the continents to defend. They did not care about the upper forest race track. They would just be cowards and shameless cowards. After a few decades, when the commotion died down, they would return to their old business. If they were not calm, not to mention the tens of thousands of cultivators here, 1 or 2,000 Jin Dan swordsman group that was rushing here, which upper forest cultivator could resist? Too ruthless, not leaving any leeway for others. The leader of the upper forest group was relatively calm. When he heard the newcomer say that he was a shaking Shadow Realm cultivator, he immediately understood that this was a trap. He wanted to restrain everyone from acting rashly, but he was hesitant. If 200 or 300 people were to act so timidly in front of a single swordsman, what would they say in the future? That moment of hesitation had resulted in a huge mistake. Jin Dan couldn't hold it in any longer. With such a huge loss, even if they sold themselves, they wouldn't be able to make up for it. It was obvious that this shaking shadow swordsman was the culprit. Since he had already killed 2 of them last time, what reason did he have to let this one go? A few of the most hot-tempered Jin Dan surrounded him and cast their spells. No matter how this matter would be settled in the future, the most important thing right now was to vent the anger in their hearts. Murder! Murder! If you agree to a bet, you must accept your loss. You upper forest people don't have any professional ethics. Are you trying to cheat us of our spirit stones? Amidst Lu Xiaoyi's wails and howls, the upper forest Jin Dan fell one after another. It was an extremely bloody scene. This agitated even more upper forest Jin Dan to surround him. The situation became very chaotic. To the tens of thousands of gamblers, the Foundation establishment cultivators, other than hiding in a corner, they had no other choice. They didn't even dare to go to the betting booth to claim their prize, because everything was still unclear. Although their hearts were on the side of the shaking shadow swordsman, that was only their hearts. To the 1 or 2,000 Jin Dan, their gains were already considerable due to the amount of money they had bet. There was no reason for them to give up. But for the same reason, it was also unrealistic for them to fight to the death with the upper forest cultivators without even seeing the shadow of their spirit stones. The upper forest people had already been beaten to death and had fled. Who could they look for to collect their spirit stones? Thus, no one was willing to step forward to help the swordsman. This was actually the darkness of human nature. To most people, the upper forest people definitely wouldn't be able to take out 2 billion supreme-grade spirit stones. But what if they killed the swordsman and only had to bear a debt of 1 billion? Even if they were to give a discount and pay less, it would still be acceptable. After all, the final ranking of the donkeys had too much of a conspiracy. Humans were all selfish. They only cared about their own benefits. How could they get it? How could they get it without any risk? But no one considered who had given them the credit for the success of the 12 consecutive bets. From their point of view, they should help to the end. To be able to take out so many spirit stones to bet on the donkeys, it probably didn't matter if they lost anything, right? Lu Xiaoyi had never counted on them. What he was doing was to incite a chaotic battle with the upper forest Jin Dan. Thus, even if it was a one-on-one battle, he didn't fly far. He just circled around in the air and killed a few to increase the hatred, causing the upper forest cultivators to be unable to stop. More than 200 Jin Dan surrounded one, and a few were killed. Could they stop? Of course not. The more they surrounded, the more there were. They didn't have any face to talk about. They came from different backgrounds and worked hard for the gambling house. Who would talk about the rules? A spectacle appeared in the upper forest valley. A swordsman was charging left and right. He was surrounded by hundreds of cultivators. Further away, there were hundreds of cultivators who were ready to join in the battle at any time. Even if his individual strength was peerless, with just the number of people, he would be worn down to death. This was the thought of the upper forest cultivators. It was also the thought of all the spectators. They were all waiting for the swordsman to die so that the upper forest cultivators could sit down and negotiate with the gamblers. The gamblers naturally thought that they had the advantage, whether it was in terms of numbers or morality. Even if they didn't fight, they could just pat their butts and leave. This was an unbearable pain for the upper forest competition. Only a bystander could see more clearly. Now that the situation had developed to this point, Slug was very clear that not many of these Xianglin thugs would be able to escape from this place. Lu Xiaoyi hadn't used his full strength. He was a king of Jin Dan who could easily kill weak Jin Dan cultivators. Fighting with these unorthodox Jin Dan cultivators really didn't interest him. These people should be the whetstones for his Jin Dan brothers, not for him. His energy should be placed on the 7 upper forest cultivators and little Lu who might not be able to hold back their envying. Just as the upper forest cultivators were attacking one after another, 3 groups of black dots appeared on the horizon. They were approaching rapidly. Those were 3 demon blades. Each blade was formed by more than 30 swordsmen. When they appeared, the upper forest cultivators, including those who were watching the show, understood that things weren't as simple as they had imagined. The demon blades were sharp. They had finally been summoned by their boss and found a chance to vent their decades of energy. Regardless of whether they were hunting or watching from the sidelines, they were all mercilessly cut down by the demon blades. Dozens of people charging against hundreds of people. The difference in momentum was like the difference between heaven and earth. The individual swordsman was already slightly better than the other swordsman cultivators. Under Lu Xiaoyi's guidance, the Shadow Sword Palace had refined their swordsmanship for dozens of years. Many of the swordsmen's strength had increased by several folds. Strength, courage, experience, momentum, and the willpower that had been trained in the heaven and earth chessboard and the large sections. When all these factors were added together, there was actually no suspense at all. It was a massacre. Chapter 9:13. P.S. Uncle, if you calculate again, the calamity at 135 years old is still a calamity of love. Lu Xiaoyi no longer attacked. Instead, he hovered alone in the sky, watching his swordsman brothers display their might in the valley, chasing down the fleeing enemies. At this moment, he was no longer the rich gambler. Instead, he had transformed into the overlord of a continent. As he swept his gaze across, no one dared to look him in the eye, even if there were many Taoist disciples among them. At this moment, who didn't know who he was? The heaven and earth chessboard against the hundreds of people from the Bitter Zen temple. Who could stop him? On the Red Mound, he killed Yuanying and true monarchs. who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. A sword from the Taipu realm could destroy a Buddhist country. Who could doubt that? Now, he was the ruler of a continent. Even if it was a small continent, it was still a continent. The hundreds of Jin Dan swordsmen under him were also a force to be reckoned with among the 3,000 unorthodox groups in Zhou Xian. The only thing he lacked was the support of a shaking shadow cultivator. However, he came from the free and unfettered roaming world, which made up for this shortcoming to a certain extent. As long as everyone followed the rules, who could do anything to him in Zhou Xian? The battle was one-sided without any suspense. At this moment, the gamblers finally understood. It was impossible to get any compensation. Even the upper forest donkey racing would probably stop for many years. Their reputation was already bad. If they didn't keep their word, who would be willing to come? Since they couldn't get anything, they should at least vent their frustrations, right? Under the pursuit of the shaking shadow swordsmen and the covert attacks of the Jin Dan gamblers, the 200 or so upper forest cultivators collapsed. Less than 10% of them escaped. They didn't kill to their heart's content. This was the only feeling the swordsmen had. But now, they completely understood their position. They only needed to wait for their leader's orders and wouldn't act rashly on their own accord. Slug left the battlefield. There was no need for him to continue watching. It was not a battle of the same level at all. He needed to return to the airship and check if anyone had sent out a message after they left. This was the only thing he could do to help. He felt a little uncomfortable because his friend didn't ask him for help. Even if she begged him for help, he might not necessarily agree. People were just that strange. The betting points were completely cleaned out by the swordsmen. Although the gamblers were envious, dealing with the motley crew of Xianglin and the shadow-shaking swordsman army were two different matters. No one dared to make a move, even if they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. This was the power of Sure. He took out 10,000 spirit stones from the spoils of war. Behind him were 3 demonic sword formations, all of them brimming with killing intent. He showed it to the 10,000 gamblers who were looking at him. His voice spread throughout the place. I only want my own capital back. As for the rest, please nominate a reputable person to take back the capital according to everyone's bets. If there is a surplus, please divide it among yourselves. Time waits for no man. I'm afraid that the reinforcements from the 7 continents of Xianglin will arrive very soon. It's best if you don't delay or linger. After the people of Xianglin fly into a rage out of humiliation, they won't care if you're a Juji or a Jin Dan. They won't care if you participated in the battle just now. Not everyone cared about this small amount of spirit stones, but the majority of them did. Most importantly, this attitude made the gamblers have a good impression of him. They were no longer reluctant to leave the Xianglin arena. A cultivator asked, Master Shan, why aren't you leaving yet? Are you protecting our escape route? This was a young Jin Dan cultivator. He was bold, so he wasn't stingy. Lu Xiaoyi answered honestly. You're not my son. Why should I cover your escape route? Everyone laughed. Lu Xiaoyi continued. The grudge between the shadow-shaking realm and the 7 continents of Xianglin isn't over yet. Since we've already started, how can we end things so hastily? Xianglin still has strength. Since they dared to make a move against the shadow-shaking realm, I won't let them off until I break their backs. His words were brimming with killing intent and were incomparably domineering. The gamblers who heard this were all convinced. The return of the bets was carried out very quickly. The Jin Dan cultivators among the gamblers took the initiative to return the foundation building cultivators' bets. Often, they would even give a little more. At this particular moment, as a Jin Dan cultivator, no one cared about this small amount of money. They were more concerned about other things. The sky became spacious. The foundation building cultivators all fled. They couldn't stay any longer. Spells had no eyes, and battles were cruel. If they were hit, it would be too unjust. They could only leave and bring the legend of Xianglin Valley to the entire Zhou Xian upper realm. 100 swordsmen left the gambling den. Most of the Jean Dan cultivators also left, but there were still a few hundred who weren't afraid of trouble. This was also the nature of gamblers. The composition of the gamblers was complicated. There were those who simply liked to watch the fun. Some were hot-blooded and impulsive, and wanted to help the swordsman and the gang fight. There were also those who didn't get along with Xianglin and wanted to take the opportunity to take revenge. There were also those from the 9 great sects who weren't afraid of trouble. Generally speaking, the relationship between the gamblers and the gambling den was sharp. However, it was unheard of for them to develop feelings for each other after a few visits. It could only be that the more they visited, the more they lost, and the more depressed they felt. In the eyes of many, even if the remaining Xianglin Jean Dan cultivators all came, they would not be able to withstand the full force of the swordsman's army. What risk could they take? They would only be able to beat them when they were down. Lu Xiaoyi no longer cared about them. He was already benevolent enough to take care of his own matters. He didn't have the energy to be their nanny. He took care of them and returned their bets because he didn't want to become the public enemy of the entire realm. At the same time, he could also help him build a reputation and occupy the moral high ground. They couldn't leave for now. It wasn't easy to get the opportunity to weaken Xianglin Qilu to the greatest extent. How could he allow them to make a comeback? After the swordsman left, could he reopen the Xianglin arena? Or could he passively wait for Xianglin Qilu's possible attack? It would be best to eliminate them all at once. This goal could only be achieved by eliminating at least 50% of the Jean Dan cultivators. In his estimation, at the very least, the Xianglin cultivators would counterattack once. Only then would he decide whether to stay or leave based on the situation. Some of the gamblers were bored and began to study the donkeys. Naturally, they quickly discovered the secret of the number plates on the donkeys, which led to another round of angry curses. Slug quietly returned. He didn't approach, but stood at a distance to communicate with his divine sense. "I've checked the flying boat. There were 2 people who spread the news. They are..." Lu Xiaoyi remained calm. "Brother Slug, thank you very much. I'll treat you to wine and beans another day. However, you'd better take the boat and leave now. Your flying boat is too eye-catching. I'm afraid it won't escape the attention of others." Slug was unable to restrain his anger. "Ear! You have the nerve to say that? Wine? Beans? Is this what you call a meal that costs 10,000 spirit stones? Do you think I'm a beggar?" Lu Shi complained that he was poor. "Master Lu's family doesn't have any extra food. There are hundreds of mouths at home, unlike you who can eat your fill and bury your family in a coffin." Slug was so angry that he turned to leave. However, after taking a few steps, he remembered something. "One ear! Where's my share of your granny's bets? Thousands of top-grade spirit stones were stolen by you just like that?" Lu Xiai sighed. "I always thought that this amount of spirit stones was nothing to upper sect disciples like you. What is it? You didn't even pick it up when it fell to the ground." Chapter 9:14. Author's note: this chapter seems weird. A day later, a large group of practitioners approached. Lu Shi licked his lips cruelly. Swordsman's swordsmanship was to grow through killing. It wasn't something that could be improved by practicing behind closed doors. Even if they had to pay a huge price, it was worth it. Only those who survived were true elites, worthy of his continued training. "This is your battle, I won't interfere. The other party only has about 300 people, not much stronger than the previous ones. The only difference is that they are more organized. You decide how you want to fight." He made it sound easy for Che Xie, Zhou Fan and the other leaders, but in reality, it wasn't that easy. It could only be said that they could fight. In any force, there was a difference in strength between cultivators who focused on affairs and cultivators who focused on seclusion. Cultivators who had less potential in the future could only use affairs to provide more convenience for themselves to obtain more resources. Those who had more confidence in themselves would focus on their own cultivation and ignore worldly affairs. Although it was not absolute, it was generally the case. In the previous battle, the upper forest people's cooperation between the open guards and the hidden guards was unfavorable. They lacked a strong commander, some wanted to fight, some wanted to escape. All kinds of reasons caused them to be unable to withstand a single blow. However, these would be improved in the upcoming battle with the upper forest Jin Dan group. Therefore, it wasn't easy. However, these were all things that they had to face alone. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't always be by their side to protect them. In fact, they also had the ability to do so. Before they met him, each of them had their own reputation and influence in the region. If he did everything himself, it would only limit their ability to take responsibility. A good leader should give his subordinates a stage to perform to their heart's content. Do you see their 7-colored flag? There must be someone under the flag who can deploy it. Shoot people, shoot horses, capture bandits, capture the leader. Being able to capture the flag in the midst of thousands of soldiers is also a good way to attack the enemy's morale. The swordsmen were eager to play such an important role in the battle. However, Lu Xiaoyi didn't give them the chance to volunteer and directly called them out. Feisha, you will lead Heijio and Broken Bones. The 3 of you don't have to hide in the demon sword formation. Look for an opportunity to capture the flag and kill the enemy. Do you dare to do it? Feisha nodded without hesitation. I will not let you down. Lu Xiaoyi coldly looked at the crowd. The demonic sword formation is not omnipotent. It was impossible for there to be an omnipotent array in this world. The advantage of a swordsman lies in his ability to adapt to the situation. The sharpness of a sword formation, the smoothness of a sword, the ability to split up and attack in unison, and the ability to grasp opportunities. We have discussed this countless times over the past few decades. Whether it is an armchair strategist or a comprehensive study of the subject, it is on the shoulders of the leaders like you. From the beginning of the battle until the end, I will not overstep my authority and give orders. This is a battle that belongs to you. If you don't do it well, then you can just stay in the shaking shadow realm and wait for death. Only the strong can survive the storms of the cultivation world. The crowd dispersed. Lu Xiaoyi called out to Feisha. Call those 2 over. I'll teach you some secrets of assassination. When the others heard this, their faces were filled with envy. Only Feisha herself was not happy. The upper forest Jin Dan group came rolling in. 300 to 400 cultivators pressed down from the sky. The visual atmosphere was still very shocking. Under the 7-colored flag, a cultivator raised his voice and said, Upper forest donkey racing has a long history. In the past 10,000 years, there has never been a case of refusing to compensate customers. However, this does not include cheating. Upper Forest will not accept a one-year bet in the shaking shadow realm, because it has violated the spirit of fairness in the contract itself. However, we will accept the losses of all the followers. A payout of 100,000 is a joke. There is no such logic in the world. However, we are still willing to compensate every follower tenfold to show our sincerity. Everyone present, please spread the word. As long as there is a bet, Upper Forest will not reject it. The words of the Upper Forest cultivator were very sincere. Even though he had suffered such great losses, his reputation was ruined, his people were wiped out, and the other party was obviously using this as a pretext to make a fuss. He was still able to tolerate it. This meant that he really did not want to give up the Upper Forest donkey racing business. As long as the donkey started running, money would roll in. This was the reason why Lu Shi drove away most of the gamblers. The cards were clear. As long as one had a brain, they would know the purpose of the Shaking Shadow Swordsman group's attack. In terms of law, there was no right or wrong. Therefore, driving away those who were not mentally strong, as for the remaining hundreds of people, there was no way to completely control them. In the end, they still had to return to the most familiar rhythm of the cultivation world, which was to compete with their fists. This was the essence of the disputes in the cultivation world. What made him happy was that Chasia and the others did not bicker. Instead, they drove the three demon swords formation and charged forward. That's right. If you can fight, then don't fight. The battle started immediately. He was not worried about the demon swords formation. He only looked at Phasia and the other two. He was very curious. In such a battle of life and death, how would the three of them choose? Among the 7 continents of Upper Forest, Huya was the continent closest to Upper Forest Valley. It was also the bridgehead where the second wave of Jin Dan group attacks from the 7 continents of Upper Forest. The Jin Dan group had already set off, but the atmosphere of uneasiness still shone on the continent. When the swordsman group arrived, they had the outstanding achievement of fighting against the Bitter Zen Temple alone. Later, they had the thunderous attack on Upper Forest Valley. Although they had the absolute advantage in numbers, no one could guarantee the outcome. On the top of the Ria Peak, the highest peak on the land, 7 Yuanian cultivators are standing against the wind. Even the honorable cultivators like them can't stay calm anymore. They can see that the Xianglin race track has been destroyed, but what's worse are the things that can't be seen. Once the reputation of the gambling house was gone, a large number of gamblers would leave. The impact would be far-reaching. It would not only affect the donkey racing, but also many other entertainment venues in the 7 continents. The threshold to enter these venues was not high. Which small continent could not handle? The reason why the 7 continents of Upper Forest were unrivaled in Zhouxian was because of their popularity accumulated over tens of thousands of years. Now that their popularity had suffered a devastating blow, it was much more vicious than directly attacking small continent. The 7 nascent soul stage cultivators were restricted by the rules of the domain and could not go to the scene in person. However, through remote sensing, with their powerful consciousness, they could vaguely sense the intense spiritual vigor riot coming from the direction of Upper Forest Valley. One of the Yuanying Zhenren's eyes were filled with worry. This wave of 300 to 400 people is already the maximum number of people we can gather in Upper Forest 7 continents. The remaining Jin Dan are all outside. It's impossible to call them back in a short period of time. However, with such an advantage in numbers, I still feel uneasy. Even if we win, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. The problem is how to re-establish order in Upper Forest race track in the future. Another Yuanying Zhenren agreed with his view. Of the 300 or so Jin Dan, there are some who can fight. However, there are also many elixir, talisman, and weapon-crafting cultivators mixed in. They are hiding behind the formation. Once the sword formation breaks through, they will be exposed. The situation is not optimistic. I still stand by my words. I do not support a second wave of Jin Dan. Unfortunately. Chapter 9:15. What's the point of saying that? If we don't send out a second wave, are we just going to tolerate it? If that's the case, Upper Forest Foundation will be destroyed. How are we going to raise so many disciples and cultivate? If we go out and get laughed at, we won't even dare to report our origins? So what if we do? We don't have to report our origins because there's no one else. How many Jin Dan are there in the 7 continents of Upper Forest? Less than 1,000. We lost 200 before. If we lose another 600, we'll have an 80% chance of destroying all Jin Dan. Can our reputation be restored? No. Who knows how long it will take for a person to recover? Tell me, is this a dead end? This debate had been going on for a while. In fact, the debate had started ever since the swordsman's attack. Because of their attitude towards the sword vein, the 7 continents had never reached a consensus. One side believed that gambling was a business, and there was no need to get involved in the disputes between the cultivation world's powers. Regardless of victory or defeat, the losses would outweigh the gains. Short-term benefits could never be compared to long-term benefits. A businessman should stand on the side of a businessman. Since there were customers everywhere, wealth would naturally flow in. This side was the majority, and Four Little Loos thought so as well. The other side believed that since a major power had made an offer, they shouldn't reject it. Furthermore, it was precisely because of their good relationship with the major power behind them that Upper Forest Valley had been able to progress smoothly until now. Since they had made a request, they shouldn't reject it. Actually, the ones who made the decision weren't them, but the higher-level perfected monarchs. There were dozens of Yuanying in the 7 continents of Upper Forest, but the ones who made the decisions were the only 2 perfected monarchs. They were also the ones who had connections with the major powers. Perfected monarchs also needed to take sides. At the very least, they needed to have someone to rely on. Otherwise, if they went out into the universe and there was no one to protect them, it would be normal for them to die. Different positions led to different perspectives. Perfected monarchs had their own views, Yuanying had their own attitudes, and Jin Dan had their own considerations. The 4 Little Loos who opposed attacking the sword vein were actually the 4 Little Loos who didn't have perfected monarchs. But among the 3 supporters, 2 of them had perfected monarchs. If you really look at the cultivation world, it is actually very simple. My Upper Forest 7 continents can moderately participate in the internal strife of Zhou Xian domain. If we don't, anyone can bite us in the future. How are we going to live? Most importantly, we must try our best to avoid getting involved in the battle between Taoism and Buddhism. This is a huge pit. Once you fall in, you won't be able to climb out. A perfected master hit the nail on the head. The struggle between my Upper Forest 7 continents and the sword vein is a struggle between the unorthodox schools. But the problem was that the one behind the Upper Forest was Buddhism, while the one behind the sword vein was Taoism. This was the most troublesome problem. If we don't deal with it properly, it'll be a disaster. We need to know how deeply these great powers want to get involved. If they just want to wave their fans behind us, then we should work hard to defend our rights. We can't give in to the brutality of the sword vein. If in the end, they will come up to us naked, then we will withdraw and not help anyone. At this point, everyone was on the same boat after all, so they gradually reached a consensus. The best-case scenario. Our Upper Forest attack will be effective. We can get rid of the swordsmen and reorganize the Upper Forest track. But we shouldn't go on endlessly. After all, we were the ones who started this conflict. In the worst-case scenario, our attack will be fruitless, and we might even suffer heavy losses. In this case, we also need to know how much support Taoism has for the sword vein. Since Jin Dan's level can't do it, we might have to make a trip there. The few of them were silent. They had no choice. This was the helplessness of a small power. Without the orders of a supreme elder, they would never act rashly against the swordsmen. None of the orthodoxies would do that. Now that things had developed to this point, unless they could win the battle in Upper Forest, they would still have the initiative in their hands. If they couldn't win, they could only increase the stakes, because this would mean the survival of the Upper Forest 7 continents. Without the title of the Holy Land of the Gambling Ground, how could the poor little continent support the lower-level cultivators? Without the foundation of the lower level, the 7 continents could only gradually decline. This was the last thing they wanted to see. At first, they thought that they were just expressing their attitude to the people behind them, but in the end, they met a bunch of lunatics who refused to take any losses. They were in a real dilemma. Retreating meant death, but charging forward also meant death. If we have to step forward to solve this, who will go? How many will go? The Yuanying of Upper Forest were preparing for the worst. They were skirting the boundaries. They saw Upper Forest Valley as a part of the Upper Forest 7 continents because this was a space surrounded by the 7 continents, and there was no sea of clouds. Therefore, invading Upper Forest Valley was tantamount to invading the 7 continents. The Yuanying spiritual master had the right to defend them. Zhou Xian didn't have a unified way of thinking about land planning. In principle, each land referred to the land itself and the atmosphere on the land. Upper Forest Valley was a special existence. It was indeed outside the atmosphere of the 7 continents, but it was also not within the sea of clouds. It depended on how you looked at it, who looked at it, and which angle you looked at it from. We can't all go! This kind of behavior is already at the edge of the rules. We can't just send one. The leader of the Shadow Sword Vein, the One Ear, has already killed the Yuanying spiritual master before. That's why I think only 3 will go. Huya, Lin Quan, Gui. Huya and Lin Quan were the 2 little continents with monarchs. Gui was in favor of attacking the Sword Vein. Therefore, the core logic of this suggestion was that whoever shat should clean up the mess. Spiritual Master Huya was a little disdainful. He felt cold because of the cowardice of his companions from the upper forest 7 continents. However, with the enemy before them, he couldn't go overboard. Otherwise, the upper forest 7 continents would be completely hopeless. At the end of the day, the Sword Vein was too unreasonable and too arrogant. The upper forest guards had indeed killed 2 swordsmen. Why didn't they just return the favor? Why didn't they pursue the responsibility of the scene manager? Even if they killed 8 or 10 people, there would still be room for negotiation. But now, they directly destroyed the arena and killed hundreds of people. They didn't even give them a chance to negotiate. They wanted to beat upper forest 7 continents to death. Just based on this point, he would definitely make a trip there himself. He wanted to see if this ability to kill people of a higher realm was real. 3 Yuanying spiritual masters were enough. He also needed to remind the other spiritual masters of the little continents to completely extinguish their thoughts of keeping the peace. There's nothing to worry about. What I want to tell you is that I, Huya, and Lin Quan, the true monarch, are nearby. Furthermore, they've invited a few friends. The Sword Vein's harm is limited. It can't escape the circle. The meaning behind his words was clear. Since Upper Forest Valley was tacitly acknowledged as part of the 7 continents, then the great cultivators had the right to make a move. The scope of this great cultivator was not only limited to Yuanying spiritual masters, but also true monarchs. One of the spiritual masters sighed. Is this going to get bigger and bigger? How are we going to resolve this? Chapter 9:16. Upper Forest Valley, the battle was in full swing. 100 swordsmen against 3, how could 400 Jin Dan fight? Of course, they had to use the sword formation as their main attack. If they spread their swords out from the start, there wouldn't be enough space. Furthermore, it would form a terrible situation where 1 versus 10 swordsmen were involved. Lu Xiaoyi could handle this with ease, but they couldn't. The advantage of a sword formation was that it could reduce the disadvantage of numbers to a minimum through cooperation between the swordsmen. The 7 continents of Upper Forest were terrible in this aspect because they didn't have the same orthodoxy and rarely cooperated with each other. Most importantly, they had never prepared for a large-scale battle. The swordsmen had prepared for decades. This created a strange phenomenon. The swordsmen, who were better at one-on-one battles, had formed a sword formation, while the spell cultivators, who were most fond of formations, were struggling in one-on-one battles. Actually, it was just a matter of whether they had the awareness of danger, and whether they could combine everyone's strength into a rope. A place like a gambling den was also a type of business. They might hire a few fighters, but they wouldn't build an army. Against a group of swordsmen like the Shaking Shadow, who were focused on fighting Jin Dan, they could still hold their own in the beginning. However, as the battle progressed, it became more and more obvious that they would lose. After decades of training and interacting with each other day and night, every swordsman knew the limits of their companions' abilities, what they could do for them, and how far they could go. They could unleash their full offensive power without any worry about defense because they had the support of their companions. This kind of trust was very important in a group battle. It was the cornerstone to unleash the greatest combat power. In comparison, it was harder for the upper forest cultivators to achieve this. While they were attacking, they had to consider their own safety. They didn't dare to put their lives in the hands of unfamiliar people. How much of their strength could they unleash? One sword cultivator might only be able to deal with 2 upper forest Dharma cultivators. However, 10 sword cultivators together could deal with 30 to 50 Dharma cultivators. When 100 sword cultivators acted in unison, their commands were as powerful as a mountain. For an opponent of the upper forest cultivator's level, it would take at least 700 to 800 sword cultivators to deal with. What's worse is that when the sword cultivator's demon blade sword array pierced through the thick wall of the upper forest people, the non-combat cultivators who stayed behind the array, those who were not good at fighting and were only here to make up the numbers, had no chance to fight back at all. Chaos ensued. Swordsmen were very sharp. They were originally a orthodoxy built on the basis of combat and slaughter. They weren't rookies before they joined the Shaking Shadow sword formation. They were experienced, and after the Shaking Shadow's strength was even more outstanding. The swordsman's sword formation's sword formation. There were even some who added insult to injury. Among the hundreds of spectating gamblers, there were some who couldn't help but make a move. There were many reasons for them to do so. If they were alone against the upper forest cultivators Jean Dan's group, they wouldn't make a move. However, if there was a main force to contend against, they would only need to kill some of the weaker cultivators. When the situation was set, the human nature of looting a burning house took over. There wasn't much danger anyway. They were just going with the flow and sprinkling salt in the wounds of the upper forest cultivators, hastening their process of defeat. At this point, things were getting out of hand. At this moment, the leader of the upper forest cultivators, who was in charge of the overall situation, was killed. The one who did it was Facia's team of 3. The timing was very good. They avoided the possible danger of making a move too early, and at the same time, they didn't achieve nothing after the battle had ended. Lu Shui narrowed his eyes. The team's mission was indeed completed, but they could have completed it much earlier. These 3 people were really making things difficult for him. He didn't want to put these 3 people in the sword formation, because the sword formation was a whole that required a high degree of coordination. The collapse of one link could have an impact on the whole chain, causing immeasurable consequences. It was the swordsman's destiny to face life and death calmly. However, their lives shouldn't be wasted on a link that could have been avoided. To test their loyalty, it shouldn't be at the cost of other swordsmen's lives. He still hadn't figured out how to deal with the 3 of them. This was because he was very clear that the news could be sent to Buddhism, but it could also be sent to Taoism. The situation of the battle had begun to shift towards a massacre. Lu Xiaoyi didn't stop it. If it was the sword vein that had fallen to this state, no one would have shown mercy out of sympathy. The cultivation world didn't care about this. He was suspended in the air. Everyone knew that he was the brain and pillar of the sword vein, but no one dared to attack him. In the eyes of the gamblers, they couldn't help but sigh. Only a person who could cultivate to such a level could be considered to have no regrets in life, right? Lu Xiaoyi actually had regrets. As an opponent, the upper forest cultivators were still too weak. He was also very conflicted. If he chose a strong opponent like the Bitter Zen Temple, he couldn't afford to lose. If he chose someone like Upper Forest Jilu, it didn't seem to be very effective. Up until now, only 3 swordsmen had died in 2 large-scale battles. This was far from being cruel. The real battle was already over, but Lu Xiaoyi did not let his guard down. 7 little Lu, who possessed the cultivation of nascent soul Taoist masters, were being pressed to the ground in front of his own home. How could those nascent soul cultivators sit still? It didn't make sense. He had already acted, taken advantage of them, and killed them. With the Shaking Shadow Realm's current status, he had already done his best. He couldn't continue. Retreat! Form the sword formation! We'll retreat in the direction of Little Hua Land! Lu Xiaoyi decisively gave the order. The swordsmen scattered in all directions didn't hesitate and immediately retreated. They were few in number, and discipline was the guarantee of their battle strength. Lu Xiaoyi took the opportunity to cup his fists towards the gamblers. The green mountains will never change, and the green waters will always flow. My fellow Taoists, for your help today, I will repay you in the future. Shaking Shadow Continent will always welcome your patronage. We might not be able to race donkeys, but we might be able to race pigs. As the saying goes, if you beat up the young, the old will come. Upper Forest won't be able to take this lying down, so I'm sure you can all guess what we might encounter in the future. At that time, it will be difficult for us to protect ourselves, and we might not be able to take care of all of you. Why don't we just disperse? How could the gamblers not understand? Jean Dan was the young one, and couldn't fight anymore. The old one could only be a Yuanian cultivator. They weren't famous, and didn't have the ability to cross realms to fight. If they continued to stay here, it wouldn't be up to them if something happened. Most of the gamblers chose to leave, but there were still close to 100 who chose to follow. Among these people, other than gamblers, there were also murderers. Some inner sect disciples were confident that they could escape from the Yuanian cultivators, and some even wanted to take advantage of the situation. Crossing realms to kill was an honor. Many people didn't have the ability to do so, but they didn't have the opportunity to do so. They also wanted to know how the madness in the sword vein would end this time. Chapter 9:17. Just as the swordsman's 3 demon blade formations were formed, 3 powerful auras chased after them. Lu Shi stopped and smiled. Trying to kill your nascent soul? Looking at the fervent gazes of the swordsman, Lu Xiaoi pointed to the distance. 1 against 1, I'll be in charge of cheering you on. When encountering a powerful Yuanian, you can't run, because no matter how fast you are, you won't be able to outrun the Yuanian. You'll be eaten one by one while running, and you won't even be able to use your own strength. Swordsman is a class that can't leave one's back to the enemy. This is also a type of teaching, a dangerous practical teaching. The 3 upper forest Yuanian encountered a group of people, a group of Jean Dan that were courting death. You overestimate yourselves! There's no need to hold back. Since we're already here, if we don't kill them, they'll say we're bullying the weak. Why don't we just take advantage of them? Taoist Huya coldly said. The 3 of them faced the enemy head-on. If they had to form a formation when Yuanian bullied Jean Dan, they wouldn't be able to hold their heads up high. To the 3 of them, the most honorable battle in this situation was to face the demon blade formation alone. Taoist Huya threw out a dice with 6 sides, with mountains, clouds, stars, plants, beasts, and humans. It was a very special 6 royals formation, and was also his strongest defensive treasure. Although he said it casually, he didn't underestimate his opponent at all. This was the basic fighting quality of a cultivator. 30 swordsmen from one of the demon blade formations launched their attacks at him simultaneously. Among the hundreds of sword rays, there were flying swords that materialized, and there were also sword rays that split apart. Some attacked from the front, some from the back, and some from the side. It basically included all aspects of a flying sword attack, with no blind spots and no gaps. Huya stood in the middle of his dice, and the 6 sides of the 6 royals formation shone brightly in all directions. The thickness of the mountain was unbreakable, the depth of the sea of clouds was immeasurable, the mysteries of the stars were unfathomable, the entanglement of the plants was unavoidable, the devouring power of the demonic beasts was unparalleled, and the willpower of the people was unbreakable. The 6 sides of the die each produced a different phenomenon, and the flying swords attacked these various phenomena in vain. They were either scattered, bounced off, or devoured. Among the several hundred sword lights, not a single one was able to do anything. He smiled disdainfully. How can a grain of rice emit light? If the swordsman's single sword attack couldn't break through the opponent's barrier, it would be pointless no matter how many of them there were. To a swordsman, quantity was never as important as quality. This was the reason why Lu Xiaoi had been tirelessly pursuing attack power ever since he started practicing his swordsmanship. In fact, although Taoist Huya's dice treasure looked very impressive, it was far from being the best among Yuanying-level treasures. At least, in Lu Xiaoyi's eyes, the six-sided defense was too diverse. Are you really good at using earth to control mountains? Or did he specialize in the Sea of Clouds technique? Was it to understand the mysteries of the stars? Or was he well versed in the creation of nature? Or did he have a top-notch demonic beast by his side? Or perhaps it was to take people as the foundation and limit oneself? Although he seemed to be proficient in everything, he was actually quite sloppy in everything. Of course, in the eyes of the swordsman, the Taoist form of the six royals was indeed impenetrable. Different people would have different feelings when looking at the same magical item. Huya's sleeves fluttered, and several offensive treasures flew out. However, it immediately caused the sword cultivator's demon sword formation to lose its footing. Only by relying on the sharpness in his heart and the trust between brothers did he manage to withstand it. However, looking at the situation, he would not be able to hold on for long. This sword formation was led by Che Xie. Knowing that things were not going well, his hair was disheveled and he was prepared to risk his life. The other two sword formations weren't any better. On the other hand, Lin Kuan's Taoist master was using a spirit formation technique. With a raven's dusk, he enveloped himself and the sword formation. This was a defensive spirit formation, but it was also an offensive spirit formation. It was completely dependent on the cultivator's will. It was capable of both offense and defense, allowing one to advance and retreat freely. However, because it was capable of both offense and defense, its defense wasn't the strongest, and its offense wasn't the strongest. This sword formation was led by Tsong Rome. He was used to having everything go smoothly in the previous two battles. However, he didn't expect that when he encountered the Yuanying, he wouldn't be able to display his abilities. If he couldn't pierce through the myriad of sword techniques, what was the point? The third demon blade sword formation was led by Nan Dang and Zhou Fan. Among the three sword formations, they suffered the least pressure from the attacks. However, they were also the most helpless. Taoist Master Guishi took out a huge turtle. Its body was huge, about 100 feet long. He stood on the turtle's back. All the attacks were useless against the turtle's incomparably thick shell. That huge turtle also didn't stretch its head out to bite people. It only breathed out turtle's breath, causing people to feel intoxicated and their souls to waver. If it wasn't for the sword formations helping each other, someone might not have been able to hold on. The three battlefields were all in a predicament. However, the strange thing was that the three Yuanying had yet to succeed. Firstly, the swordsmen in the sword formation were united as a stronghold, relying on each other in life and death. More importantly, there was still a swordsman strolling leisurely in the middle of the battlefield. This scene caused the hearts of the hundreds of gamblers to waver. Even if it was a Yuanying from a side sect, when they really fought, their imposing manner wasn't something that Jin Dan could compare to, no matter how outstanding they were. Even so, the three Yuanying still had someone in their hearts. They didn't dare to use their xianqi to kill because of the leader of the swordsmen strolling leisurely. Everyone knew that in the group battle with Jin Dan, this leader of the swordsmen wouldn't make a move due to his status. However, in the battle with the Yuanying, he definitely wouldn't just stand by and watch. He was waiting for an opportunity. This was also the smartest way to take care of the overall situation. If he joined one of the battle groups, the other two would definitely crumble immediately. He might as well do what he was doing right now, strolling leisurely, causing the three Yuanying to be apprehensive. In such a situation, the three Yuanying didn't dare to use their full strength. They were afraid that if they used their full strength to kill, the leader of the swordsmen would take advantage of their weakness and attack. A sword that could kill Yuanying was different from the swords of these lackeys. A person's name, a tree's shadow. Even in the cultivation world, a famous person who could kill people of a higher realm would cause the Yuanying to be extremely wary. No one wanted to see the background of a legend, a screen. In the stalemate, the sword formation was on the verge of collapse. The three Yuanying were also communicating. Taoist Huya said fiercely, We can't let this drag on any longer. What kind of yuanying is this? I know what the two of you are worried about. How about this? The three of us will attack together, and see what that murderer chooses to do. Life and death follow the will of the heavens. Furthermore, even if he really attacks, with the support of the other two, do you think we can't even take a single blow from him? Taoist Lin Kuan and Taoist Geishi nodded their heads in agreement. They were very clear that if this dragged on, they could also kill the swordsmen one by one. However, there were over 100 swordsmen. There were too many of them. If they didn't use their big moves and dragged on for too long, there was a possibility of a change. There were still over 100 people outside who were watching the show with evil intentions. Only by using their big moves together could they kill them all. Chapter 9:18. Lu Xiaoyi originally wanted to train these swordsman brothers. But when the battle began, he knew that even though the training might seem realistic, it also meant that there would be casualties. He had overestimated the strength of his brothers, and also overestimated his own teaching. Even though they were a lot stronger than before, they still had no chance of winning against an original leveled cultivator. Most importantly, none of them could break through his defense with a single strike. This was the source of the awkwardness. At the same time, he also realized that the sword formation was lacking something. It lacked a sword technique that could gather the strength of all the swordsmen into a single sword. He didn't think about it before, but it was easy for him to gather a single sword. But for these brothers of different origins to gather a single sword, it was very difficult. First, they would need a common martial art. For example, Xiao Ying's jade tempering technique. Previously, the swordsmen were still very conflicted about this. But after this battle with Yuan Ying, they finally understood the benefits of having a common martial art. From the extremely concealed way in which the three Yuan Ying were accumulating their strength, he could feel the determination of his opponents to finish the battle in a single strike. This came from his deep understanding of the five elements, allowing him to discover the truth from the changes of the five elements' particles in the air. He didn't inform the swordsmen. For their current level, the warning would be even worse. Let them think of a way to endure it. Suffering and death was also an indispensable part of growth. His wandering figure began to shift to the side. Just like what he had always done, he was now closer to Lin Kuan and Taoist Geishi. In terms of psychological pressure, these two Yuanying were more likely to be attacked. But this was merely a psychological guidance before the attack. To him, this small difference in distance was the same no matter who he attacked. But if he were to shift to a side, it would result in two consequences. Taoist Geishi and Taoist Lin Kuan would have some misgivings when they attacked. Because of these misgivings, there would be a slight delay in their attacks. Similarly, Taoist Huiya would naturally think that Lin Kuan wouldn't be his primary target because of the distance between them. Hence, he would have a slight delay in his attacks. The three of them were accumulating their strength at the same time. It was obvious that they were going to attack at the same time. His deviation created a slight delay in time. This little bit of time could save many lives. Especially the swordsman who was in the middle of the battle between Geishi and Lin Kuan. Because what he really wanted to attack was Huiya. This was not a matter of who was pleasing to the eye, nor was it a matter of whether immortal Huiya was the leader. The core of the problem was this guy's treasured weapon. One side of the die was actually a star. Playing with stars in front of him, was he courting death? This was a tactic. Before drawing his sword, he accurately weighed every aspect of the battle, from the physical to the psychological. This was what he was good at, an unparalleled killing technique. The three Yuanying cultivators simultaneously arrived at the highest point. With a shout from Taoist Huiya, the three of them simultaneously unleashed their taboo skills. But just as he was about to open his mouth, Lu Xiaoyi nimbly moved forward and snatched it away. The direction of the robbery was in the direction of Lin Kuan and Taoist Geishi. This gave them the misconception that the culprit was definitely moving towards one of them. Naturally, he reserved 30% of his strength when casting the forbidden spell, all for the sake of receiving the swordsman's ghostly slash. The sword light shot out like lightning. Materialized sword. Big Dipper. Target, Taoist Huya. One side of the star. Body forward, sword backward. Looking at your chest, I'll spank your ass. This was the true essence of manipulating the sword. Lu Shui's style had long been engraved into his blood and bones. The moment Taoist Huya released his forbidden spell, he immediately knew that something was wrong. The brilliance of the die expanded once again, forming the highest form of defense. He was also a crafty person. This forbidden spell could be retracted and released at will. Even if the swordsman was far away, he did not let down his guard. As for his companions? What's wrong with killing a fellow Taoist but not himself? With the exquisiteness of the die, he could instantly transfer most of the defensive energy from the other 5 sides to one side. As for the swordsman's attack, he did not even put it in his eyes. Was his treasured weapon, Huya, as simple as it looked? Such a defensive form was enough to deal with any kind of attack. Even if there was a slight chance, it would still provide him with precious time to convert the forbidden spell into another powerful defensive technique. Double insurance, absolutely foolproof. After roaming the universe for so many years, this move of his had even blocked the attack of a true monarch. No matter how monstrous a Jean Dan was, how could he be stronger than a true monarch by 2 levels? His control was flawless. The power of the die was incomparably smooth. The power of the mountain, the sea of clouds, the plants, the beasts, and even the humans were all channeled into the 6th side of the star. For a moment, the stars shone brightly like a river of stars, filled with endless power. In the dazzling starlight, the river of stars and the flying sword collided head-on. In the next moment, Taoist Huya's body shattered into countless stars. Those were the countless pieces of flesh that were stained with the light of the stars. It really formed a waterfall of stars. Under the illumination of the Tao vanishing background, it emitted a mesmerizing color. The commotion here fell into everyone's eyes. Everyone stopped what they were doing, including the 100 swordsmen and the remaining 2 Shaolin Yuaning. They did not even have the desire to struggle. How could a Jinan stage cultivator use such a sharp flying sword? Even a true monarch would not be able to do so, right? Most importantly of all, the guy did not grit his teeth, nor did his face turn red. There was no sign that he was about to unleash his potential at all. He simply slashed his sword casually while taking a stroll and executed the strongest defense form of a nascent soul stage cultivator. Complete silence. The swordsman's eyes were filled with worship. This kind of swordsmanship, this kind of swordsman, was truly worth following. The 2 Yuaning's hearts were like dead ashes. They were the same as Taoist Huya. They also had a backup plan. Once they felt that something was wrong, they immediately stopped. Otherwise, if they were killed by this murderer, how could they still be alive? They did not know that the reason why they could stop was actually because of the swordsman's tactical control. They also did not know that the reason why Taoist Huya died so miserably, so cleanly, was because of himself. His enhanced version of the star dice had successfully sent himself to the gates of hell. The only advantage was that he did not feel any pain or fear, and he could die resolutely and decisively. But now, their fighting spirit was not there. With such a murderer in the sword, they were very clear that they would not be able to win. He waved his hand and signaled the 3 swordsmen to leave first. The upper forest Yuaning had lost his fighting spirit. He should stop now. After beating you up, I have to make you remember my kindness and think that I am reasonable. That is the highest level of fighting. The 3 of them faced each other in the air. Lu Xiao sighed. The lone bloodline is in a difficult situation. In order to survive and prevent endless troubles in the future, I decided to use Upper Forest Valley as an example. This junior acted recklessly and casually. I hope that the 2 seniors can forgive me on account of my young age. In the future in the universe, this junior may have to trouble the two seniors. We can't always fight to the death like this, right? The first half of his sentence was very sincere. In fact, others could guess it even if he did not say it. It was nothing more than killing the chicken to warn the monkey, so that others who wanted to make a move on Xiaoying would have a mental preparation. If they wanted to make a move, they had to think about Upper Forest Valley. The second half of his sentence meant that if he became a nascent soul, he would have to rely on the two of them to take care of him in the universe. Considering that he did not need the so-called care now, the meaning of the threat was very obvious. If he did not bury the hatchet, who knows who would cause trouble for whom in the future in the universe? With his current strength, was there a need to think so much? Chapter 9:19. P.S. It's going to be the New Year soon. I'm running out of food at home. Not to mention the smell of oil, even the cabbage has to be counted in slices. Dear readers, please do me a favor and let some slip through your fingers. In the sea of clouds outside the 7 continents of Xiangling, a Taoist was flying on a cloud. He was in a bad mood as the development of the situation was beyond his imagination. He was also struggling because a perfected cultivator was involved in a dispute at the level of Jindan. If this were to spread, he would not be able to defend himself. Even if it was theoretically his own inland valley, the development of the situation was still worse than he had imagined. Under the situation where the gold core cultivators had the upper hand, they were slaughtered like dogs. Another nascent soul cultivator was killed when he attacked, and the remaining 2 simply pretended to be cowards. From the beginning to the end, the Xiangling cultivators were the ones being pushed to the ground in this battle at the entrance of Xiangling. This could not happen. Even if he would be known as a bully, he had to stand up. Otherwise, Xiangling Valley would not be able to stand on its own in the future. If anyone dared to harass, threaten, and kill them, what was the point of having a race track? He had already thought it through. Slaughtering this group of people was not advisable. It was a recipe for disaster. He could not even kill the leader because he had another identity, as a disciple of the free and unfettered travel sect. However, he had to kill some of the individual swordsmen. They had no roots and no backing. Killing some of them would leave an impression on the others that Xiangling Valley was not a place where anyone could come and go freely. How to control the scale was something a grand cultivator like him had to consider. He could not let these people return in one piece. If they returned, Xiangling's 7 continents would lose face. This distance was nothing to a perfected cultivator. He was confident that he could stop these people before they left Xiangling Valley. However, there was a faint presence in front of him that was cutting him off. A Taoist appeared in his sight. Theoretically, he should have sensed him before he saw him. However, seeing and feeling in sync meant that he was already in the other party's perception. In other words, he was within the other party's attack range. Perfected lords were a very small circle. There were very few perfected lords in Zhou who did not know them. When perfected Lord Huya saw this person, he could not help but narrow his eyes, his heart pounding. This person in front of him was not a perfected lord from a side door, but a powerful perfected lord from Taishian Middle Yellow. Perfected Lord Taishian was all smiles. The moment he saw perfected Lord Huya, it was as if he had seen an old friend. Old friends meeting each other is especially intimate. Since we're in Upper Forest, as the host, you should treat me to a few drinks. After he finished speaking, he walked away, not even giving the guest a chance to refuse. How could true Lord Huya not understand what he meant? This was a clear message to him: don't make a move, don't stick your head out. Let's all have a drink and save some face. Otherwise, true monarch Huya was frowning. He could not refuse, and he could not shed all pretense of cordiality. This was because he was a Yin master, while the other party was a primordial spirit. He was from the unorthodox sect, while the other party was from the upper sect. But why was it perfected Lord Taishian? Not the real unfettered immortal? Did Taoists start to wear the same long johns? Perfected Lord Lin Quan approached from another direction. Similarly, an aura blocked his way. Although he did not know who it was, the Qingwei vital qi that was highly recognizable in Zhou Xian could not be faked. A voice said rudely, "Back off. The damage in Upper Forest is but 100 years of suffering. Know your shame and change. There's still room for a comeback. Otherwise, if you insist on going your own way, when the nest is overturned, how can any egg remain intact?" Perfected Lord Lin Quan was in a miserable state. What did it mean to know shame? Wasn't it just being too close to Buddhism? This perfected Lord of Qingwei immortal sect was a blatant threat. This was not strange. Among the 7 Taoist sects, Taoist Qingwei had always been known for being overbearing. If he dared to take another step forward, it would be a battle. The problem was, could he beat him? The walking monk had a fat head and big ears. In the upper realm of Zhou Xian, he was a very special existence. His Buddhist cultivation had reached the peak, and few people could reach the level of perfected Lord. However, he did not belong to the 2 major Buddhist sections. He had always been alone and did not like to roam the universe. However, he liked to mingle in the mortal world. This was also one of the characteristics of Buddhism. They could not leave their faith and preferred places with people. 2 auras came from the front. One was unfettered and unruly, while the other was mysterious. They did not move forward nor did they dodge. They just stayed in the air without saying a word. However, their true meaning could not be more obvious. The monk played in the mortal world. He could pick up and let go, and he could do anything shamelessly. This old monk has eaten something bad recently. Even my brain is muddled. Isn't this the direction to Lan Lu? Why did I come to Upper Forest? Did I go the wrong way? He turned around and left without hesitation. Lu Xiaoyi and his group of swordsmen knew nothing about this. They rushed as fast as lightning toward their target, little land of Hua. That was a stable place that never participated in the internal conflicts of the realm. It was known for its permanent neutrality. They would leave through the spatial rift there and directly return to Jiaoying realm. After doing such a big thing, if 100 Jin Dan were still wandering in the sea of clouds, that would be the real suicide. The gamblers also went their separate ways there. Very soon, everything that happened in Upper Forest would spread throughout the entire realm. It would become the most explosive example of an internal conflict in recent years. It would also let everyone understand the current attitude of Jiaoying Sword Palace when it came to plotting against them. There were benefits. All the conspirators would think carefully before they acted. Was it worth it to take the initiative to provoke these lunatics? Of course, most of the small forces that did not have any immediate interests would choose not to participate. There were also disadvantages. A tall tree attracts the wind, and if one was popular, there would be trouble. Especially for Lu Xiaoyi, who was the leader. No one knew what was waiting for him. A few months later, Lu Xiaoyi was meditating. After tens of years of hard work, and with the support of the constellation Ocean Treasure Mirror, his cultivation had reached the late stage of Jin Dan. He was only one step away, but no matter what, he could not take this step. He did not know where the problem lay. In terms of swordsmanship, his imagination was wild and unrestrained, but in terms of cultivation techniques, he was a little slow. Relatively speaking, it was very difficult for him to find the right path for himself. Just like now, he was stuck, but he did not know how to deal with it. His cultivation level was his shortcoming. Outside the hall, an aura approached, and a voice came. Sinner Fei Sha requests an audience with the Sword Master. After the battle in Upper Forest, everyone had unanimously changed their titles of leader, Master Lu, and so on. Because it was not appropriate and formal, it could not express their feelings of respect. Now that everyone was calling him the Sword Master, this group was starting to have a real soul. Lu Xiaoyi did not say anything. He only quietly looked at the swordsman in front of him. His talent in swordsmanship was not bad. Otherwise, he would not have been able to become one of the managers. Unfortunately, I am from the human sect. Like Carefree Travel, the human sect also has its own sword vein. It is just that it is not as high profile. The Heaven and Earth chessboard was sent by the sect. Of course, I am also very willing to do so. I want to contribute to the sword vein. When the new Shaking Shadow was established, the sect sent me to report. Their intention was to keep track of the Shaking Shadow's movements at all times, because this could affect the attitude of the other Tao veins. I have nothing to do with Buddhism, but I have indeed sent a message to the human sect. I hope that the sect can provide us with assistance in Upper Forest, especially at the higher levels. As a swordsman, I am actually undercover in the sword vein. This is a disgrace. I have let my brothers down. I will not object to the sword master's punishment. Chapter 9:20. Lu Xiai sighed. He knew that this person was telling the truth. Just like the other two, Heijio and Duangu, one was sent by Yuan Shi Cave, the other was entrusted by Taishian Middle Yellow. He already knew that for swordsmen, it was very difficult for someone like Jin Dan to be controlled or roped in by Buddhism. On the contrary, Taoism had an innate advantage in this aspect, because the sword vein was also a branch of Taoism. He was also sure that there were people sent by other swordsmen's sects among the remaining swordsmen. It was just that they were more cautious, or for some other reason, they were not exposed. There must be people from Qingwei Immortal sect among them. And Slug would definitely tell him not to send any messages. That bastard. Kill them all? Chase them all out? No matter how muddle-headed he was, he would not do such a stupid thing. On the contrary, since the new Shaking Shadow had connections with various Tao sects, why not make this connection semi-public? Semi-rational? When they really needed help, it would be better to have these fellows speak up for them instead of him doing it himself. In fact, wasn't he also a spy of the Carefree Travel Association? He did not dislike being a spy at all now, because he was the biggest spy in Zhou. Not only was he a spy in Shaking Shadow, he was also a spy in Xiao Yaoyu, and even in the upper realm of Zhou. Being a spy was a very honorable profession. There was nothing to be ashamed of. You're the last one to come. Heijio is from Primeval, Duangu is Tai Xian's lackey. What about you? You're from the unfamiliar human sect, and I'm from Carefree Travel. And I know that the remaining sects, Creation Innumerable, Yellow Quartz sect, and Qingwei Immortal sect, all have people here. Fei Sha was very embarrassed. She did not know what the sword master meant. Lu Xiaoyi harumphed. Our new Shaking Shadow realm was not established to target anyone. It's not Taoism, and it's not even Buddhism. We just want to live according to the swordsman's way of life, that's all. But I thought that you didn't want to destroy the new Shaking Shadow sect, and that you were just hesitating between the Shaking Shadow sect and the original sect? Fei Sha said firmly. Sword Master, please believe me. I have never thought of harming Yao Ying, because I've always believed that I was a member of the Shadow Shaking stage. I'm willing to work for the human sect, and similarly, I'm willing to die for the sword vein. If there's a conflict between the two, I'd rather end my own life than let down the sword vein. Lu Xiaoyi facepalmed. Heijio and Broken Bones are also like what you said. This is difficult. A good woman doesn't marry two husbands. Some things are easy to think of and easy to say, but when you really meet with a problem, it's very difficult. These days, you guys haven't had it easy, right? Fei Sha nodded bitterly. During the battle in the upper forest, the three of them were thrown out of the sword formation. This had already aroused the suspicions of some people. For example, Che Xie, Tsong Rong, Zhou Fan and the others were all sensitive people. However, there were some suspicions that should not be voiced out by them. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a while. Why don't we do this? Why don't we just set up a shadow shaking contact office? You'll be the leader. With Heijio and Broken Bones, we'll half open the contact with your original sect. You guys will be the liaison. Then slowly dig out the other rats for me. Why are you all hiding? What are you doing? Fei Sha's eyes brightened. Was this not chasing them away? But what should we contact? Lu Xiaoyi pointed out. Contact what? You can't do this. You're not competent at all. The so-called liaison is to ask for support from your sect before a fight. No matter if it's in the open or in the dark. Old or young. When you're not fighting, go back and complain about being poor. Good or bad, old or new, meat or vegetables, bring them all here. From big things like floating rafts to small things like needles and threads, I don't mind. Say nice things like how the Sword Master admires Tao, how he's full of admiration and gratitude towards your respective sect, and how he's willing to stand on the front line against Buddhism for the survival of Taoists. Of course, you can say nice things, but don't accept missions. Do you understand what I'm saying? Fei Sha's forehead was sweating. He could see that he was going to be a double agent. But it didn't matter, right? He had to admit that this was a good way to remove the psychological burden on both sides. Shadow-shaking cultivators were so small and poor, while their sect was so big. It shouldn't be a big deal to swindle some things over, right? It wasn't like he was the only one who was swindling. Everyone was swindling. After sending Fei Sha away, Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. The cultivation world was complicated. How could it be so easy to separate them? In the cultivation world, it was impossible to make a clear distinction between one and the other. Take himself, for example. He was very complicated and had many secrets that he didn't dare to tell others. But this didn't affect his love for the sword. Just as Fei Sha left, another old man came in. Taoist Master Mao had a worried look on his face. Just now, I received a meeting from Taoists. They want to invite the Master of Shadow Shaking Sword Palace to participate in the Buddhist ceremony that will be held on the 10,000 Buddha continent 3 months later, the Yulan Buddhist Assembly. What do you think? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. What do I think? It has nothing to do with me. Senior, you should go. Your realm is just right. Is it appropriate for a small Jin Dan like me to participate in that? Taoist Master Mao's eyes bulged. You really know how to push it. They specifically asked you to go. What's the matter with me going? Lu Xiaoyi was a little surprised. They asked me to go? Wait, could it be a Hongmen banquet? Is this the Buddhist idea? Or is it the Taoist idea? Taoist Master Mao spread his hands. I don't know either. Why don't you go back to Carefree Travel and ask? But from what I see, the Buddhists and Taoists probably want you to go too. But you don't have to worry. It's not just you. There's a big group of people. Just the Taoists alone will send people from all the Taoists. There will be perfected monarchs and perfected masters. These are the main invitees. There will be a few Jin Dan too. You guys have been to the Taipu realm before. Lu Xiaoyi still didn't understand. Is the Yulan Buddhist Assembly that important? Did they invite Taoists in the past? What level are the invitees usually at? Senior, you have to explain it to me clearly. I have a bad feeling about this. Taoist Master Mao snorted. This guy was extremely daring. Was there anything he didn't dare to do? Bad feeling? He was just too lazy to lift his butt. He had caused too much trouble. This was like a shadow cat wintering. The Yulan Buddhist Assembly is held once every 100 years. It is held alternately between the 10,000 Buddhas and ascetic meditation continents. At that time, the 10,000 Buddhas will gather, and there will be countless believers. It is the most important assembly of the Buddhist lineage. To the 2 Buddhist sects, this is a must. The Taoists are also invited to attend. This is a matter of courtesy, just like how the Taoists will also invite the eminent monks of the Buddhist sects to attend the assembly. Every Taoist sect will be invited without exception. The number of people will be decided by themselves. Usually, there will be 1 or 2 perfected monarchs and a few Yuanying representatives. The remaining 3,000 unorthodox sects will also be invited, depending on how close they are to the Buddhist lineage and so on. There will definitely be no danger. For such a Buddhist assembly, the host is most concerned about the safety of the cultivators, especially the safety of the Taoists. It's just like how we must protect the monks when we hold the Buddhist assembly. When can't you kill someone? Why must you do it now? You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.